It is 3 minutes after 10 and you are listening to James O'Brien on LBC. What would you do? What would you put on this list first? Things that we should, things that you should, or we, should we do we? Let's do we, not you. Things that we should know more about. Things that we should talk about more. There's a weird dynamic involved in our time together every day because the stuff that is most important is not necessarily the stuff that makes for the most and engaging, never mind enjoyable times together. Do you see what I mean? It's why Thomas finishes doing the news at 10 o'clock in the morning and we don't immediately start talking about the three stories that have been adjudged to be the three most important. I mean, I know this is a statement of the bleeding obvious, but it some days comes into sharper focus than it does on other days. What could possibly be more important than senior military figures warning of some fairly hefty problems on our rather close horizon? As a former NATO chief has joined their numbers today, saying that it is time to think the unthinkable and consider bringing back conscription to deter Russia from all-out war. I think the newsagents discussed this yesterday, actually. Jack was listening, and he says it's more preparing the country to deal with a war, James. We need more paramedics and mechanics, etc. It has been generations since we had to think about how we as a country would deal with a live battlefront on or near our borders. Well, you can say that again. He has also questioned, in a letter to the Times, he has also questioned the Ministry of Defence's preparedness for war, and to quote him, of a scale and ferocity that would engulf this country if NATO had to defend one of its member states under Article 5. So this would involve Russia doing to a NATO state what it has done in Ukraine and the treaty kicking in and all NATO members therefore being compelled to join in, as it were, to repel Russian forces. And given what might happen in America later this year, you can see why perhaps some of the resolve is hardening. Now, that's my theory. I think a fear perhaps of another Donald Trump presidency is motivating some of the concern and indeed alarm being expressed by senior military figures. And it's not just here. Don't think for a moment that this is a uniquely British thing. General Sir Richard Shirreff was the Deputy Supreme Allied Commander in Europe from 2011 to 2014. The journalistic shorthand for that job is NATO Chief, a NATO Chief. Germany's Defence Minister has suggested that it might be 5 to 8 years before there is the possibility of a war with Russia. Admiral Rob Bauer, the Dutch head of NATO's military committee, has said that there could be a war with Russia within the next 20 years, where, and I quote again, it is the whole of society which will get involved, whether we like it or not. This, of course, comes as the Swedish government is about to join NATO and has just reintroduced a form of national service. One of the things about the topics that we should be talking about more, one of the reasons I think why we don't is they immediately feel so enormous. Do you know what I didn't even remember to tell you about yesterday? And I just got reminded of it then when I saw that slightly clumsy looking word preparedness in the newspaper article that I'm currently consulting, a rather splendid column, characteristically splendid column in The Guardian today by Gabby Hinsliff. In 2024, the headline reads, "Peace is a luxury we can no longer take for granted." And that's going to form a foundation of the conversation that we're going to have first today. But that word preparedness, do you know what I forgot to tell you yesterday? They think that we are now less well prepared for a pandemic than we were before the last one. Can you believe that? I mean, listen, the way the media works is weird. I completely understand why stories that will provoke an enormous emotional reaction trump stories that are obviously and objectively much more important. But I can't believe how little coverage. In fact, I'm going to have to dig it out of the archives from yesterday. Can we find that article about us not being ready for the pandemic? It being less ready for another pandemic than we were ready for the last one. Just try that for size. Go on, take a moment now. Just put that on like a pair of socks. Try that story on for size. Where's your jaw now? You what, James? With less, but how? So it's just too big. We sit there to the sort of awed by the scale of that story. Do you see what I mean? You just go like, how do you even get started on something like that? And I feel a bit similar about this one, but get started we will. One of the interesting things about matters military is that there are quite a lot of people who have a deep and abiding interest in it. It's an area of genuine enthusiasm for people who have and have not done or are doing military service. Quite a lot of people do follow events as closely as we all should. And I'm relying on you, if you're in that category today, to help the rest of us out at least a little bit. But it is this story really that intrigues me most. It's this combination of senior military figures now warning that a war with Russia, and that would to most intents and purposes constitute a world war, is looking likely, I think. There's another one. The Army Chief General Sir Patrick Sanders has called for preparatory steps to enable placing our societies on a war footing. He also warned that civilians would have to volunteer for the front line if Russia began invading NATO countries. And Gabby Hinsliff writes in The Guardian today, not knowing what was going to appear in the Times, she says, at least he stopped short of calling for the reintroduction of conscription. And then I turn to the Times newspaper and I read a former NATO chief suggesting that we might have to have conscription. He says, to most professional soldiers, myself included, conscription is anathema. However, if deterrence is to be effective, Russia deterred and catastrophe averted, it might be necessary. So I think the question is what's going on. It's a Marvin Gaye morning once again, but we need a little bit more focus than that, perhaps. How has this happened? As someone who follows these matters perhaps more closely than I do, how has this happened and why is this happening now? I'm not completely stupid. I can see how the aggression on display in Ukraine is pertinent to the bigger picture, but it has been widely regarded, at least in the opening salvos, as fairly catastrophic for Putin. The expectation of a swift and decisive victory was scotched in the course of the first weekend. Where is it coming from, this fear? And how, do you know, actually, I've got to apologise to somebody. A pal of mine was over from Australia, literally just changing flights at Heathrow, and came into Hammersmith for lunch. I haven't seen her for ages. And quite a lot of people convened upon this pub in Hammersmith to break bread with her. But we didn't all know each other. And one of the people there who works on the entertainment side of television said, I was so glad when I heard you were coming because I really want to know how worried I should be about World War III. And I thought she was bonkers. It turns out she was actually paying more attention to the news than I was. This is only about a week ago. In fact, it may even have been a week ago today. And so that idea that this conversation is already unfolding in spaces. Gabby Hinsliff's piece in The Guardian today talks about cyber warfare. What would happen to the country if somehow they succeeded in switching stuff off? How long could you survive without your mobile phone? And you know, everything is in your mobile phone these days, from your bank account to your route home. So what is going on? Why are all of these voices convening on the same space? Why do you think that is? 0345 60 60 973. So I'll list the people again. You've got Germany's defence minister. You've got the Dutch head of NATO's military committee. You've got Sweden already reintroducing a form of national service. If you want to understand why, in the very simplest of terms, just look at a map and look where Scandinavia sits in the context of Russia and Ukraine, Finland even more pertinently. So that's Sweden, Holland, NATO, Germany. And then we come back to Britain, where you've got the Army Chief, General Sir Patrick Sanders, and you've got a former NATO Chief, General Sir Richard Shirreff, one stopping just short of calling for the reintroduction of conscription, one in the Times today categorically not. Conscription, since you ask, Stephen, in Milton Keynes, is essentially compulsory military service. It is, you get a letter telling you to report to an army base at 10 o'clock on Tuesday morning, and that's it. You're in the army now, to paraphrase status quo. That's what conscription is, military service, except that in the context of the first general's comments, it would only happen in the event of war actually happening. Volunteering to go to the front line. Crikey, I'm 52. I don't think it would come to that, but it does rather focus the mind, doesn't it? So why is it happening now, and how worried should we be? 13 minutes after 10 is the time. 0345 6060 973 is the number you need. While you get your act together and start ringing me, I'll just share this other story with you that is, frankly, extraordinary. The UK is less prepared for a pandemic than it was before the COVID crisis, after driving away jab manufacturers and relying on a narrow range of shots. This comes from Dr. Clive Dix, who literally chaired the UK's vaccine task force. He told MPs on Wednesday that all of the work done to ensure that the UK was better equipped with vaccines had fallen to pieces. He said all the activities were literally gone. There'd been a complete demise. Tories still marching around the room, claiming that they played an absolute blinder on these fronts. But, of course, they acted urgently and accidentally correctly without doing any of the legwork or the heavy lifting necessary to ensure that we were in a better position next time it happens than we were last time. Who's surprised? Hands up if you're surprised. No, exactly. So that's the kind of story that plays into the military one. This sort of blasé lack of understanding and knowledge, and we today will do our best to fill in some of the gaps. In 2024, peace is a luxury we can no longer take for granted, writes one columnist this morning. A former military chief writes to the Times, suggesting that we may need to revive conscription to scare off Russia. Why is this happening now? And how have we ended up in this situation? It is coming up to 10:15. You're listening to James O'Brien on LBC. The number you need, as always, is 0345 6060 973. 18 minutes after 10 is the time. And listen, I know the Daily Express isn't necessarily an arbiter of sober and objective reporting, but just as an indication of the noise that I've sought to describe already this morning, they currently have an article on their website under the following headline: UK Army conscription, age and rules as NATO prepares for World War III with Russia. So I think asking, what's exactly going on here is probably quite important. Let's start in Ilkley. Gareth is there. Gareth, what would you like to say?
Morning, James. How are you doing? You all right?
I'm good, mate.
I wasn't going to call you. I wasn't going to call you today, but it was. I just switched on the radio and heard you talking about it. I think so.
That is generally how it works, Gareth. You realise?
Yeah, I know. I'm getting that.
Go on.
Yeah, good. So I think your question was, why is it happening now?
Yes, one of my questions.
I think there's a few things going on. I think the first thing is we've basically been caught with our, what's down. We've underinvested. All this has happened on our doorstep. Blah blah blah. We realise we've looked at Ukraine, and sustained conflict is not something we are ready for. We are ready for surgical strikes in the Middle East, taking out some guys that don't fight back, use a couple of missiles and leave it. We're not. If you look at Ukraine, it's basically gone back to World War I, World War II warfare, hasn't it? It's throwing mortars at each other,
yes,
and just slogging enough stuff and see who can weather it out. We don't have the stockpiles. We don't. And one thing Ukraine has shown us is you need manpower to sustain a war, and that's their biggest problem at the moment, as well as obviously the equipment thing.
Yes.
So you've got that. Then you've got to look at the Americans, and before you even worry about Trump, because I think now that is something to do with it. The Americans. Well,
any conversation involving NATO has to take into account the fact that a man who may be the next president of America has no understanding of its importance, or indeed commitment to its role.
But I think it's beyond that, James. I think, assume for a minute that Trump isn't the next president, or the next few presidents isn't like a Trump-like president.
Yeah.
They are pressured in every single sphere of influence by a conglomerate of countries that seek to topple them from the top. They are being pressured in Taiwan. They are being pressured around Korea. They are being pressured in every sphere of influence they have. And I don't think that the Americans are confident that they have the ability to protect Europe anymore, because the minute it kicks off in Europe, for example, we're talking about Russia, all of those people that are secretly hoping to topple the Americans from their top spot, the minute it kicks off in Europe, the Chinese are going to attack Taiwan. I think most people would see that.
Taiwan is the sort of cradle of technology from where all of the tiny computer chips that our modern societies rely on come from. So just imagine if that tap got turned off overnight.
Yeah, so they're facing multiple flashpoints. Their forces are divided, trying to protect all their spheres of influence. Supply chain's very important. And then you've got that's even before you consider if the Americans actually want to help us.
Well, I mean, under NATO treaties, they would have to if Russia went into a NATO member, as things stand.
Yeah,
but why now? Why this week of so many different voices all essentially said the same thing? Why this week, do you think?
Do you not think it's one of those situations where, like, one person says something and then everyone finally feels they can say what they actually think because the dam's been broken? It's like when you're on the tube and there's a fight, no one does anything until someone says something, and then everyone helps and everyone says what they think. I think it's been building up slowly, hasn't it?
I think so. It looks that way, and the more you think about it, the more you talk about it, the more it seems almost inevitable that if you want, so military chiefs and ministers are discussing how they would build up a force of up to 500,000 troops and civilians ready to take on a country such as Russia. We're not even touching the sides of that at the moment.
No. And that's before you even worry about supply chain, logistics, spare parts.
What's your background? Are you just an interested observer?
Just interested. My dad was a security cleared defence contractor, so I had some interesting chats over the breakfast table. But he works a lot with the American Air Force. He was over in those big airfields.
No, fair enough. You just seemed a little bit more in closer proximity to some of these issues than the average Joe. Although the average Joe is more than welcome to ring in as well on this subject, not least because the presenter is an average Joe when it comes to this kind of stuff. Except I suppose I follow the news a little bit more closely than some people, and yet this one has crept up on me to the point where I just remembered, as you will recall a few minutes ago, I just remembered someone saying something to me which I thought was alarmist and a little bit odd, and yet here we are now, the military voices that have added their contributions to the conversation almost certainly should not and cannot be ignored. Do you see what I mean, though, about the size of the mountain? How do you start having a conversation about raising a force of 500,000 combat-ready soldiers and civilians? It feels like a million miles away from this country. 23 after 10 is the time. Andrew is in Trowbridge. Andrew, what would you like to say?
Hello, it's a real pleasure to finally talk to you.
Well, we'll see, Andrew. Let's not get carried away.
I've been listening for quite a while.
Well, welcome aboard.
Okay. First of all, if we want to stop this World War III from happening, I think we just have to stop using oil.
Well, what if Russia doesn't?
Sorry?
What if Russia doesn't?
Russia needs the money from where it sells oil. If we stop buying off them, they've got no money. They can't go to war.
Okay. I mean, it's a thought, isn't it? But a little bit hard to implement perhaps overnight or in time to...
We can do it quite quickly if we just had a grant for solar panels on every roof in the country.
Okay. I mean, this has gone off in an interesting direction. So the way to confound Vladimir Putin is with solar panels?
Yes. Simple, quick, and very effective.
Well, I mean, it's certainly simple. It could be quick, but whether or not it would be effective enough to replace oil overnight, I simply don't know. And you're just going to tell me that it would, and I'm going to say I still don't know. I don't want to say that I don't believe you. I just want to say it seems unlikely.
Okay. Well, it's not going to replace oil overnight, but it's certainly going to reduce its usage significantly.
Do you have any idea why all of these disparate voices have all started saying more or less the same thing in the last few days?
I don't think they started in the last few days. I think a lot of people have been shouting about this for quite a while.
Right.
It's only just in the last few days we started listening.
It started getting the coverage that you'd think it would demand. And yes. You must be right, for not least for just the anecdotal reasons that I touched upon earlier. Thank you, Andrew. I feel that I should do more. You were so pleased to get onto the programme after all this time. I feel that I should turn it into more of an event for you, but I'm not sure what I can do.
One more small comment, which is slightly off topic.
Oh, well, okay. I did ask for it.
It's something which will help you out on another topic when you'll probably come round to it.
Okay, well, yeah, why not then? Go on, fill your boots. Yeah,
fair enough. Part of the problem we have trying to shift off of oil is because there is so much money in oil.
Yeah, I kind of knew that, mate.
Yeah, and that money is distorting everything in the world now.
And, of course, it also sees epic news manipulation on behalf of the fossil fuel industry via British media and those dreadful Tufton Street flavoured think tanks that the rest of the world is finally beginning to appreciate the invidiousness of, although it has been a lonely battle sometimes at some points to illustrate that. Thank you, Andrew. 26 minutes after 10. You've broken your duck now, mate. You can come back on whenever you want. Mike's in Manchester. Mike, what's happening? What's going on here?
So on the subject of conscription,
yes.
Personally, I feel that the people who are leading these countries and obviously the governments of the day, if they are stoking the fires of saying, "Oh, this country's going to invade," or "This country's going to invade,"
I'd just pause you if I can. Okay. I haven't quoted a politician yet. All I've quoted is military professionals.
No, I'm not saying you have, but I mean, obviously, just on the whole subject, kind of.
Yeah, but it's not governments. If anything, governments are delinquent. Governments are not. This is military leaders telling governments to get their act together. It's not governments trying to scare us, mate.
You've got to my point.
Well, because it's already built on sand, isn't it?
No, I'm saying that though, if they want to encourage people to sign up, then maybe they should be signing up as well.
I like that. I mean, that's yeah. I mean, I guess so. You can always say that, or at least sign their children up as well. But it isn't. This is not, sadly, an opportunity to just put the boot into politicians for being politicians. This is military professionals, lifelong military professionals, warning governments and politicians about the threat of Russia and the unpreparedness of Western nations, of nations like ours. So it's not yet a kind of, well, it's all very well sending other people's children to war, but why don't you go yourself? You're about 8 years early with this point, Mike, I think.
Well, it's like Grant Shapps the other day said, Russia are going to, in round terms, they're going to start World War III, or there's going to be a massive invasion within 20 years, or was it something like that?
I don't know. I find Grant Shapps gratifyingly easy to ignore, but I do pay attention when some other people with rather more military nous and knowledge make similar noises, and they have certainly been doing that. I think that let's pick up on two of them, actually, because this is kind of important. It's tempting to just laugh it off when you see the Daily Express writing about World War III, but you've got Germany's defence minister, Boris Pistorius, it's a cool name, saying 5 to 8 years possibly before some form of engagement with Russia. And then you've got the Dutch head of NATO's military committee suggesting that the possibility of war with Russia within the next 20 years would see the whole of society get involved, whether we like it or not. And I suppose, in a way, the question of why this is happening now has been answered. It's happening now because it's been slowly percolating. It's been slowly escalating. These concerns have been expressed, and the situation in Ukraine has hardened them. And for me, as an amateurish observer, for me, the possibility of someone who is absolutely not committed to the NATO settlement becoming the President of the United States of America again would really focus the mind. Not least because I don't think that it is necessarily controversial to suggest that Donald Trump often seems to be more aligned with the interests of Vladimir Putin than he does with the interests of your average American voter. Bless their little cotton socks. If you can help out on this one, 0345 6060973 is the number that you need. Why is this conversation gathering pace at precisely this moment in time? And I don't really make any apology for asking how worried we should be. 0345 6060 973 is the number you need. Thomas Watts is here now with your headlines. 10:33 is the time. You're listening to James O'Brien on LBC, where it's a bit of a mad one, isn't it? Even the words World War III have you reaching for the smelling salts. But I'm not sure we're best equipped, really, to contemplate these questions against that backdrop, against that sort of just shock, if you like, at the words themselves. But, as I've detailed already this morning, an awful lot of very informed people are sounding worryingly similar on the prospect of war with Russia. And war with Russia, if it involved the invasion of a NATO country, is technically world war. And the warnings now are coming thick and fast that we are simply not ready for it. So why? Why aren't we ready for it? What has happened? And why are all these voices converging now on the same space? Dave's in Yeovil. Dave, what would you like to say?
Oh, hi, James.
Hello,
first time, so thanks for this.
Welcome.
I think a lot of this with the generals talking about conscription is a little bit I think they're just illustrating the point that the UK armed forces at present are particularly low in strength and numbers, and retention is a problem as well with some elements of the armed forces.
I mean, like every other part of the public sector in a way, it's under-resourced, underfunded, low morale, and high vacancies, I imagine.
I can't think why that might be, James.
No,
different subject, I feel.
It isn't, isn't it? But we'll focus on this one because it's the one you know about.
So, I mean, basically, the capacity to train people who a majority probably wouldn't want to be there isn't there. There isn't the manpower to train an excess of manpower in a short time.
I hadn't thought of it that way around. So you throw the word conscription into the mix as a concerned military person,
well, we are
because you get attention.
I'm ex-armed forces, 22 years. But the reason why we punch above our weight with the equipment and the facilities that we have, the resources, that's what I was looking for. We punch above our weight, which is why, the Americans still continue to work with us. I'm not denigrating the Germans or the French or whoever
just in
else
terms of capability.
The Norwegians have all got their capabilities.
Yes.
But we do punch above our weight, which is why, for instance, it was a couple of years ago, I can't remember, it was a company or two companies of Royal Marines ran rings around 2 battalions or 3 battalions of, I can't remember, US Army, US Marine Corps, and they ran rings around them. Purely because our training, I do believe is probably second to none.
So why do you think this is happening now? Why do you think these noises are being made now?
I think it all comes down to money.
Yes, it's always money. And
we've got rid of a lot of ammunition and vehicles that we've got rid of. In a way, we've saved money that way, because when you have ammunition that's coming to its life X.
Yeah.
Hang on a second, somebody's trying to get hold of me.
Well, that's all right. Don't let me detain you. Matthew's in Sleaford. Matthew, what would you like to say?
Hi, James. I think your previous caller made some really interesting points there. But one of the big problems that the armed forces have got more generally, and when we talk about this, we have to talk about the armed forces, not just the army, even though it's the Chief of General Staff that was mentioning the idea of increased numbers and the potential of a citizen army, is in terms of recruitment and retention. Both armed forces are massive. All armed forces are massively underserved in terms of their numbers. They're not hitting the numbers that have been set for them in terms of budgets and capacity, but also in terms of retention. Most people who are joining the services today do not see this as a long-term career for them. And so you've got a lot of movement in terms of people coming in and out. You're having to retrain different people in the same jobs continuously. And so you lose that capacity and that capability to perform at an efficient level.
I mean, in percentage terms, how diminished are we, do you think, as a military force compared to, I don't know, the Falklands?
In terms of where we were in the Falklands, you had an army of over 100,000, an air force of over 40 to 50,000, and a navy over about 70 to 80,000. You're looking at an air force now, which is my particular area, is less than 40,000. Yeah,
it's quite stark, isn't it? Quite an arresting contrast. And of course, this is not a British conversation. This is a conversation that's been had across Europe and particularly Northern Europe, because and the thing we haven't mentioned that we should have done is if Putin succeeds in Ukraine, the questions that we're asking today are kind of all variations on what would he do next, aren't they?
Yeah. So what would he do next? I think sort of taking on a NATO country is unlikely.
No, but if you're in Latvia or Estonia, you can probably expect a sort of change in your life if Ukraine falls.
Absolutely. I think their security would be greatly diminished. And I think it's important to remember in terms of a NATO response is that it doesn't necessarily have to be a military response. It can be diplomatic support. It can be support that's short of a military effort. There's nothing within the NATO constitution that says it's automatically either a tripwire that sets things off or that it's going to be a full-scale military response. It could simply be a diplomatic note of protest to say Putin, you shouldn't be doing this.
So you have I mean, best case scenario in a sense, but you have an early 20th century style war of attrition unfolding on European soil, and one of the reasons, and this is quite depressing, one of the reasons why these voices are now converging on the same space is probably because they are now contemplating the possibility of a Russian victory, and what that would mean either militarily or diplomatically is not something many of us have seen in our lifetime.
I think to a certain degree, I'm not sure what the odds of a Russian victory would be. I think if you're going to take the analogy of the First World War, it took the Entente powers, France and Britain especially, several years to grind down the German army to a point where they could win and to learn the combined...
I mean, it's my fault because I drew the parallel, but we're both forgetting Trump, aren't we? Trump's pretty clear. As Steve Bannon told Robert Peston this week that they wouldn't send another penny to Kyiv's war effort. Republicans are blocking President Biden's military aid packages left, right and centre. So, you know, the idea of Trump going into the White House and doing whatever Putin tells him to do is probably motivating some of this conversation.
I would have thought, I think it's the realisation that perhaps NATO isn't as strong as it might be in the event of a Trump victory, and that Europe needs to do more to take on it and to defend its own security. So, yeah, I think there's a degree to that. But what we're really starting to see here, I think, is the culmination of what the armed forces have said for many, many years, that conditions within the armed forces aren't great in terms of accommodation, in terms of capacity, in terms of defence procurement and the problems that exist with that. And so we're seeing, I think, the culmination of this, and now it's starting to get attention because there's something to be focused on in terms of events around the world, and not just Russia, Ukraine, but what's happening in the Middle East.
I mean, you can say that again. I think it was a historian, was it Francis Fukuyama, who said that history had ended. And by that he meant there won't be any more wars. We'd reached a sort of a position of peace, and that clearly that ship has sailed, obviously. But the sort of attitude of Western, particularly Britain, perhaps in the last 20 years, has been, we don't really need to worry about all that kind of stuff. It's not as if there's ever going to be another world war. Is that? I'll tell you what would be quite useful, given the conversation that we've been having. Imagine if we had some sort of European army. Wouldn't that be a good thing? So that all of the allies in Europe would be united against a foe like Russia, and they could operate without necessarily being beholden to a changing of the guard at the White House. If European allies, I mean, obviously a trading bloc would be a wonderful thing to be part of, but if there was some sort of military force that managed to shrug off American patronage and therefore address these issues independently of America, where the next president might well be a Vladimir Putin lapdog. That would be great, wouldn't it? Do you know, of all the nonsense that Brexit introduced into public discourse, the European army was one of the things I struggled most to understand. Farage was always belching on about it, and as if it was some terrible thing. I presume it's some sort of commando comic post-war hangover, is it? Well, we can't be in the same army as the people we once fought against, which demonstrates such an incredible ignorance of history. I mean, genuinely incredible ignorance of history, to think that because you fought a war against a country 50 years ago, you couldn't possibly be on the same side in the next war. We were on Iraq's side in the Iran-Iraq war. And then when they invaded Kuwait, we went and dropped bombs all over them. And these ideas are, well, we're talking about Farage. Of course, there's an absolute ignorance about almost anything complicated. But my view was always that the armies you're supposed to be worried about are generally not the ones you're in. So they say, we've got to leave the European Union. There's going to be a European army. No one ever stopped to tell me why that would be a bad thing. Why would that be a bad thing? Something to do with foreigners, probably. That's where all Brexit breaks down, isn't it? It's something to do with foreigners, James. Yeah. Oh, okay, right. Well done, everybody. Khalid's in Slough. Khalid, what would you like to say?
Hi, James.
Hello.
I wanted to put an idea out there that perhaps this might be a signal that there is negotiations going on underneath the surface between Russia and NATO, and this is really a saber-rattling exercise of European nations, because it feels rather kind of organised, and it clearly it's not a coincidence that.
Well, I mean, you make an excellent point, but it is a contrast to the earlier point that cited bystander effect, wasn't it? Is someone broke ranks?
Yes.
I forget who. Sweden introducing conscription, whatever it might be, and therefore the conversation has evolved organically, as opposed to you suggest, and they both hold water. It's the idea that it is a little bit more organised than that.
I mean, I suppose exactly. I mean, that's my point. It might be for two purposes. One, it's saber rattling and, in a sense, putting down some boundaries with the Russians as we kind of hopefully near towards a political solution.
Yeah.
Because I question whether we'll ever get anywhere with a military solution in Ukraine. And then the second point might be a way to re-engage the United States and remind them of the horrors of war and the requirements of conscription, because obviously the United States have their own very troubled history around conscription in wars that they fought far away. Yes. Exactly.
And that's a big part of the American psyche, isn't it? It's very much something that Trump appeals to, the idea that these wars are none of our business. Why are we bringing our boys back in body bags? We should just leave these people to slug it out among themselves. So, I mean, it is the prospect of... and Kim Darroch has made this point, Downing Street National Security Advisor, ex-Downing Street National Security Advisor, a victory in Ukraine, which would probably involve Trump essentially abandoning eastern Ukraine to Putin, wouldn't necessarily mean tanks rolling immediately into neighbouring NATO countries, but it might start the systematic destabilisation of places like Latvia and Estonia with large Russian populations. Minority, but still quite big. And so if there are talks underway, this is just a sort of tightening of a screw, one particular screw, to say, actually, we're contemplating military engagement. We are thinking about it. We are talking about it now in the West in a way that we haven't done for a generation. And that sends a message to Russia. That's what you're saying, I think.
That is my point, I suppose. And the fact is the Russians are probably waiting for this election cycle to play out.
Of course they are.
As I'm sure you've mentioned, there's hundreds of elections going on over the world this year, obviously not in Russia. And so clearly they're waiting to see where people sit. And in the United States, and the challenge with Trump is that he can make anything look like a success, right? So, a weak stance to North Korea is suddenly a deal with... I know,
suddenly a sign of his excellent diplomacy. I mean, I like that. I also like that, just that little throwaway comment, if you're wondering why I was laughing. There was a lot of elections all over the world this year. Obviously not in Russia, which is kind of the point, isn't it? Yes. 10:47 is the time. 0345 6060 973 is the number. There's a lot going on, isn't there? I'm glad we've talked about this. I certainly didn't make you any promises about achieving full clarity on an issue as complex as this, but I think we've probably managed to convey the urgency and importance of it. 10 to 11. I still haven't quite nailed it, have I? The relationship we should have with Brexit now, in terms of the time we spend together every day. It trends quite regularly. There is an astonishing catalogue of stories bubbling away at the minute, which all illustrate the absolute absurdity of becoming the first population in history to vote to impose economic sanctions on itself. But we still have the old problem of relying on a media that is almost entirely, or was almost entirely, dedicated to telling you to vote for it. How do they properly and honestly report the reality of the ramifications? The Times does a decentish job, actually. It wasn't a leave paper. Murdoch spread his titles right across the issue, as he often does. The Times, obviously you can rely on the FT and up to a point the Guardian, although they've got an economics editor who was an ardent and still is an ardent leaver. But some of the stories in the Times today, just two or three straight up, painting a pretty grim picture. The 15-hour waits at Dover when the new checks come in. The trade deal with Canada has been suspended because guess what? Trading with a country of 60 million people is not as attractive to Canada as doing a deal with a country with a territory or a market of 500 million odd, and quite a few others. I shall do a roundup. I'm thinking, do you think there might be a market for a Brexit podcast now? A weekly sort of half an hour of catching up on what is actually going on as a sort of antidote to the propaganda-driven news media. I don't know. I think probably someone's already doing it, are they? But if they're not, I'm constantly making rods for my own back. You know what will happen? It'll get commissioned, and then this time next month I'll be going, oh, blimmin' heck. Why did I put my hand up for that? But I think it's public service. I think perhaps looking at the news some days now, you sort of think, where can I go? Where's a one-stop shop for all the true ramifications of not being in the European Union? I don't know. Anyway, put that on your to-do list. I'm thinking about it. Back to the army and the possibility of World War III, which I just still sounds a bit crackers, doesn't it? But probably less so than it did 53 minutes ago. Harry's in Bristol. Harry, what would you like to say?
Yeah, thanks for taking my call, first of all.
You're very welcome.
Just wondering if we're taking more notice of it and just listening to it a bit more. Is there so that we don't know that's happening? Well, obviously there is some that we don't know that's happening in the background. But are they saying it just now to say, well, if it does happen in the future, they can't turn around and say, well, we didn't pre-warn you.
Yes.
I'm a military veteran.
Well, don't blame me. Don't blame me. I bloody told you this was going to happen.
Exactly. You get my idea, It's just, that thought just keeps pinging in the back of my head, and I can't seem to shift it. Am I the only one thinking it?
I think you might be. Well, not now because you've said it, so other people will be thinking it. But I don't know that I don't know how much water it holds. I think there's too many different voices coming forward for it to be a sort of exercise in preemptive self-exoneration. I think that the plan is to make governments, because the noise is coming from the military, the plan is to make the politicians take some of these issues more seriously than they currently are.
Well, let's be honest, they're never going to do that. They're a bunch of overpaid monkeys, and that's my personal opinion.
To which you are, of course, entitled. Ex-military by any chance, Harry?
How does it come across? Yes.
I think the phrase lions led by donkeys
I've done 2 tours of Afghanistan, and,
Crikey.
I was getting paid, £35 a day when I first joined up, and it was just like, well, hang on a minute, I'm getting this much, and they're getting that much. And
I don't know if you saw the story. They spent £1 million on severance packages for politicians in Liz Truss's 10-minute long government. So I think that makes your point pretty powerfully. What's happened to the army since you left it? I mean, where is it now in the context of being ready? And even when you were in it, as an earlier caller said, we can go into foreign territories and do sort of surgical type exercises and then come out again, albeit that they often take a little bit longer than originally planned. But the idea of a 20th century style conflict where two sides are bedded in, trying to bite chunks out of each other for months and then years, it doesn't seem to me the British Army would be anything close to ready for a war like that.
I completely agree with you, to be honest with you. I think the morale is down because everyone's worried about cuts at the minute. Yes. I mean, was it a few weeks ago? I think they were saying the Marines have got to justify their existence, and that's just stupid, personally.
Yes. And that's why you have that initial thought, oh, it's just generals doing what they always do, which is trying to get more money for the army. But actually, when you add in all the other voices, you realise that this is... Oh, well, there is something else going on here, something a little less familiar than the usual, almost annual tradition of a general saying, oh, the army's not ready for a war, can we have some more money, please? This is loads of different military people, senior military people from right across Europe, all saying more or less exactly the same thing. The only thing they differ on is whether or not it's time to unveil the conscription word yet or not. And today we have one senior British former soldier doing precisely that in the pages of the Times, a former Deputy Supreme Allied Commander in Europe. These job titles are great, aren't they? So, Supreme Allied Commander. Did you know? You probably did know this. I think I knew this, but I'd forgotten. James Blunt is on Full Disclosure. Is it today? Are we releasing it today? I'll play you a bit later. I really like James Blunt. I've always really liked James Blunt. Even when it wasn't cool to like James Blunt, I really liked James Blunt. He sort of rehabilitated his reputation by being amazing on Twitter. But I don't know if it makes me cool or uncool, but I just like his songs. I think he's written some absolutely beautiful, beautiful songs. And it's a good interview. It's quite a tricky one, actually. I'll tell you more about that later. But he led 30,000 troops into Pristina at the end of the war in Kosovo. He wasn't in command, as he pointed out to me, so he was following orders, but he was literally in the front. If he'd turned left, if he'd gone the wrong way, 30,000 troops would have followed him. It's like the Grand Old Duke of York, except there's 30,000 men. Just to use the figure of speech from the nursery rhyme. Can you imagine that? 30,000 people behind you. As you go, and you go, which way is it now, boss? Oh, crikey, hang on, let me check the map. Go right, left. It's really interesting. Anyway, I digress. Let's squeeze in Lily, who's in Moreton in Marsh. Lily, what would you like to say?
Hi, James.
Hello.
Thanks for having me on.
You're very welcome.
So basically, I just wanted to say, obviously, it's super scary times at the minute. And with them saying, the whole conscription service, I was just saying when I was in secondary school, they made everyone do the CCF between 14 to 18.
Yes, same here, actually.
So you could either do the Army or the RAF at the time.
Yes.
And I think instead of putting it, obviously we couldn't tell now what's going to happen, but getting kids to sort of have these life experiences then.
Did you go to private school? Did you go to private school?
I did, yeah, I did.
I think it happens quite commonly in private schools, but not in other ones.
I was super lucky, and it built me massively, and I got so many experiences from it. But just instead of throwing it on people, it might be quite good to sort of encourage.
That's actually a really good idea. I was rubbish.
Don't get me wrong. I was so bad. I was the only person in 8 years not to get a promotion. I was terrible.
I think I can beat that. I got told by a wing commander that I was the worst cadet he'd ever had the misfortune to encounter of 20 years school's liaisons officer. I was in the RAF. We didn't do anything, Lily. Do you know what we did? All was Tuesday afternoons. They just showed us slides of planes. And we had to recognise them. Aircraft recognition. What use is that to anybody? I'm not going to defeat Vladimir Putin by being able to go, oh, look, that's a chipmunk.
No, I know. But the thing is that obviously everyone, I completely agree. It wasn't like, obviously, you're getting ready to join the army.
It sows a seed, doesn't it? It puts you in. It puts you in a place where if I've got to go, it's time for the news. But that's actually a very sensible suggestion. Although as an old bloke, it's all very well being in favour of ideas that don't affect you and do affect young people. But one afternoon a week, CCF, most private schools do it, I think, or certainly an awful lot of private schools do. And it would just sort of create a different mindset among younger generations about the military, because I presume that much older people than me grew up with a completely different attitude. It may even, to be charitable, it may explain why people like Farage were able to give so many people the willies when they talked about a European army. Maybe there is a different psychological relationship with the notion of the military for older people because of proximity to war, and younger people could have theirs enhanced by what Lily suggests. 4 minutes after 11 is the time, and you're listening to, well, you should know by, I have to keep telling you, you're listening to James O'Brien on LBC. I never should have mentioned that Brexit podcast, should I? You've gone mad for it. It would, in fact, as No Hostages points out, it would be a sort of equivalent to my tweets that always begin with O. I don't know if you follow me on Twitter. At Mr. James OB is my handle. Is that the correct term? Do we call it a handle? Is my handle on Twitter is at Mr. James OB? I know it's not called Twitter anymore. It will always be Twitter to me. And I put O. So I'll tweet a story, which is essentially yet more evidence of Project Fear becoming Project Fact. And I just put O on it. And there's been quite a few recently. And there's a lot more coming as well. But I must stop doing this at the top of the hour. I must stop doing little sort of asides and diversions and digressions at the top of the hour, because you want to know what we're talking about, right, this hour. You want to know what to ring in if you're minded to ring in. But don't let me go home today without giving you a little flavour of what my new Brexit podcast might sound like, by bringing you up to date with all of the Brexit-related news that probably won't be shared with you by people that encouraged you to slap yourself in the face with a wet fish in 2016. 5 minutes after 11 is the time. I think this subject is absolutely fascinating. The Victims Commissioner and the Domestic Abuse Commissioner, two incredible women, Baroness Newlove and Nicole Jacobs, have turned their attention to antisocial behaviour, persistent antisocial behaviour, and they want it to be taken more seriously. They say that it is still considered to be a low-level problem. Police and local authorities do not take it seriously. They want amendments to the Victims Bill that would mean residents suffering persistent antisocial behaviour would have the same sort of support that victims of crime get. And that would run right up to counselling. I want to know, I want your help today in making everybody listening understand why this is not a low-level problem, why this is such a serious subject. To be, and I think the word victim is actually quite helpful in this case, to be the victim, to be a victim of persistent antisocial behaviour in your home. So it is happening in your home. I'm not talking about street crime. We talked about that quite a lot yesterday. It's about having your peace of mind stolen by people who live near you or people who congregate near where you live. I don't know why this one gets me so much, because I've never suffered from it. I've never endured it. But I think we all have a little flavour of it, don't we? If there's a car parked outside your house at 2 o'clock in the morning and the music is really, really loud, it's a weird sense of violation, because you're in your home and yet someone is polluting your existence. Someone is stealing your peace. That's a good phrase. I like that phrase. They're stealing your peace of mind. And it could be your neighbours, or it could be that you have unfortunately ended up living somewhere where other people congregate. But the culture within the police, according to Baroness Newlove, is to treat it not as a criminal activity, but as a neighbourly dispute or misdemeanour. And that means they don't investigate, even if the criminal threshold has been met. And she describes it as arising from an institutional view that all antisocial behaviour is low level and low harm. So I just want you to tell me your story on this one. I want you to tell me the story of antisocial behaviour in your home, in your life, that will help other people understand that it is categorically not a low-level issue. Some breaking news for you. If football fans in particular will be interested to learn that Jurgen Klopp, the manager of Liverpool, has announced he'll be stepping down at the end of the season. That's a very big story in football circles, perhaps not quite as big as Phil Brown going to Kidderminster Harriers earlier this month, but I suppose it depends upon your perspective. But Jurgen Klopp is stepping down as Liverpool manager at the end of the year. I want your help in conveying the psychological impact of antisocial behaviour. Often when we talk about the internet and bullying of children, we talk about the difference between their generation and mine, in that most people could close the door on their problems at the end of the day. You would get home from school, you could close the door. Less so for people like me who went to boarding school, but you take my point. You throw your satchel under the table in the hall and turn the telly on, make yourself some toast and sit down in front of Blue Peter, and you were temporarily safe from the things that were plaguing your existence at school, for example, or at work. You have that sense. What's the word? There's probably a German word for it, for a particular sense of calm that comes from being at home. It's enhanced. You can be peaceful on a bus, you can be peaceful in a park, but there's something cocoonish about being at home and feeling safe, feeling calm, feeling peaceful. And what antisocial behaviour does is take that away from you. It takes it away. Is it hugger? Is that what I thought? Is that the Danish word? Sort of. Is that specific to being at home? It's a Danish or Norwegian word that describes a cosy, contented mood evoked by comfort and conviviality. I think it's more primal than that. So that makes me think of comfy pillows as opposed to being at home, as the simple act of sealing yourself off from the outside world and being unreachable, untouchable by problems that may be plaguing you when you're outside. Or even if you haven't got any problems at the moment in your life, the fact that you're at home, sanctuary is the word I was looking for. Well played. Sanctuary. You have a sense of sanctuary. That's more than hugger. And it is perhaps unique to being at home. And what antisocial behaviour can do is just break that. And until it happens, you probably didn't know how valuable it was to have in the first place. So it could be young people congregating on the street outside. You could actually have been specifically targeted as opposed to just having to deal with random noise. I suspect that noise and neighbours have a psychological impact upon people that Baroness Newlove is 100% correct about. It is almost a form of torture. If they use it as a form of keep not being able to sleep at night is a form of torture. Sleep deprivation is a form of torture. And yet if the victims commissioner is correct, and we have no reason to doubt her, then the police are not taking it seriously. 1 in 10, so 1 in 4 adults has suffered from antisocial behaviour that made them feel unsafe in their local behaviour, in their local area, forgive me. And of those, 1 in 10 said it had been so persistent that they had been forced to move home. So you'd go straight to the front of the queue. What was it that was so awful about your last place that made you actually move? You didn't want to move except to escape the antisocial behaviour. You were enjoying. You liked your home. But somebody or some people rendered it intolerable. I want to get to the heart of the psychological impact of it, but also the detail of what it was that you went through. The numbers you need, as always on this programme, are 0345 6060973. There is a German word, apparently, although I'm going to mispronounce it horribly. Well, actually, I better check that's not rude. Oh, no, more than one person has sent it in, so you're not encouraging me to say rudies. I'd have to check that. I don't want to say the German word for something filthy by accident, but there is a German word, and it is Gemütlichkeit or something, words to that effect. That's what I want. And I also want to know, on a broader issue, where it's coming from. Why is this problem so much bigger than it used to be? I'm not an old bloke who likes to wang on about how things were better in the good old days, but there is a sense... do you know where I get it? Sheila Fogarty and I have got this in common, that people on public transport who don't have headphones on, but are watching stuff or listening to stuff or having a conversation on speaker instead of quietly, it just speaks of a psychological shift in parts of the population to a place where you are supremely unaware. I'd like to think that if someone took a moment to explain to you how obnoxious that is, you'd probably realise. But you've somehow ended up in a space where you're supremely unaware of how your conduct is impacting on other people. I marvel at it sometimes, particularly on the bus, more than the tube. So you don't really get the signal on the tube. But I catch the bus every day, and more often than not, there'll be someone either watching a programme, like watching a film, or conducting a conversation, not so much listening to music, that's slightly odder behaviour, without having headphones on. And you sort of think, you're not in a bubble. People seem to think that they're living in a state of detachment from the rest of society. And I think that perhaps explains some elements of antisocial behaviour. But that's not to excuse it, or indeed to ignore the fact that some people are just really rude. They almost revel in their rudeness. So what's it like to have your home life completely disrupted by antisocial behaviour? And for the rest of us, lucky enough not to have lived through this or be living through this, what is it that has changed most recently? 0345 6060973. 18 minutes after 11, victims of persistent antisocial behaviour should have a legal right to counselling, just like victims of violent crime, 2 government commissioners have said. Why? Why do you know that is a good idea? And how badly has your life been affected by, in your home, your life in your home, by antisocial behaviour? Joanne is in Fulham. Joanne, what can you tell us?
Hello, yes, thanks for taking my call. Good morning.
You're very welcome. Hello.
Yes, I had a very severe case, actually. I sold my property in the end to move from an antisocial issue. So that was that you'd still be there now if it wasn't for the neighbours? Yes,
Good
indeed,
Lord.
Absolutely, yes. Yeah, it was that tragic. Yes. I had a very severe case. I tried to get the police involved. The council were involved. The police kept referring it back to the council, saying it's a council issue, they must deal with it. Right. We tried to have some mediation. That didn't go forward because the lady kept pulling out and said she didn't want to do it anymore. Right. It was basically a family living above me that were quite, I would say, they were dealing drugs. I had no proof of this. Okay. They had people coming and going all night on the doorsteps. They were always someone there. They were actually dropping things on the floor at 4 o'clock in the morning, 3 o'clock in the morning, just to traumatize me, keep me awake. I didn't sleep. For 3 years I was there, I didn't sleep at all.
That's murder, isn't it? Because it
was hell.
Because you nod off. You nod off.
Yeah.
You
and they'll do it on purpose to wake me up.
Well, I mean, you're clearly certain of that to the point where you moved.
Sure.
What would, if they were here, what would they say? I mean, they might have felt that they had a grievance against you. I don't know.
Yeah, and that's what I reflect on. I think, did I do something wrong? I'll put it in perspective. I'm a single, full-time working mother. I had a daughter of 5 years old at the time.
Yes.
I used to come home at the end of my day at 7 o'clock in the evening with my daughter from school and from work, exhausted. I would go straight to sleep, put her in bath, wake up early, leave again. No one would know I was there. Right. So I had a real clear mission of my life, just working, getting through the working week with my daughter. I looked at it, they looked at it, I guess, that I was a different class to them. I shouldn't be in the same building as them because they were council tenants,
right.
But I was a private owner in the same building.
So some envy there then, probably.
A lot of envy, I would guess, I say, that's what I had believed, but also their upbringing. I think they were from a different background as well and had moved around a lot, weren't really accepted into society, but their behaviour wasn't accepted in society either. The behaviour wasn't right when you're living in a property.
How did it start? Was it just noise? Was it just because I think that unless it's happened to you, it's impossible to understand what it's like, isn't it, to have people above you usually rather than below you? This
is the thing. It started off with the noise, and I gently mentioned that to them. I just said, "Oh, hi. There's a little bit. Would you care to be careful on the floor because it's really waking me up in the night, and I'm sorry to mention it." And they're like, "Oh, yeah, sure, of course, we'll be fine, no problem." Okay. It persisted. But then also it got so bad it became violent. 2 men kicking my door down in the middle of the night, and my daughter seeing it at 5 years old, scared stiff, wetting the bed that night because she was traumatized.
Good Lord.
And it was so we actually lived with trauma after that, where we moved on.
You sound. I don't know you, Joanne, but you sound as if you're still a bit traumatized by it. You sound as if your heart's going 10 to the dozen, even as you tell the story.
Well, you're absolutely right, because actually it's bringing up all the bad memories.
I thought it might be.
I used to be hounded, leaving my property at 7 o'clock or 8 o'clock in the morning, hounded with a woman shouting out the window at me.
Good
abuse. If I'd mow my garden, my grass on the weekend, she'll be shouting out the window at me. It was just an anger. And
it reached the point where you thought, I've got to get out of here.
Yeah, it would become violent. And actually it came to the point where I was very scared of what my reaction will be now to defend myself and my daughter, being lone female in a house. So for me, I was scared about how far to the breaking point will they push me, where I'm going to react in such a bad way. I'm going to be imprisoned with my daughter taken away. It got that bad. My father and my family said, look, get out of there at all costs. Even if you lose on the property, just get out.
No, it sounds like it. Well, I'm glad you did, but goodness me, it does sound as if you're still haunted by it, and I can completely understand why. That sleep is probably the biggest thing that can be taken from you. God knows insomnia is a nightmare itself, but when it's not insomnia, it's actually disruption. It's deliberate disruption even. Then I've just listening to Joanne, oddly, I've just been reminded I did have a tiny experience of it many, many moons ago. I shared a flat with a guy who was getting quite obsessive about the noise coming from downstairs, and they were obsessed with him. I think he'd taken out the carpets and put in like a Hessian flooring, and they were furious. So they could obviously hear more movement above than they could before. And they'd call the noise abatement on each other. It was during my days as a gossip columnist, so I was never in. But they would call the noise abatement on each other. And one time they went to see the people downstairs, and they genuinely had put their speakers on top of their wardrobe, facing up at the ceiling above, so that we would be kept awake by the noise. And do you know what? I don't think I've ever clocked this. I think they had LBC on. Now I come to think of it, I wasn't that familiar with LBC growing up because I didn't grow up in London and we weren't a national station then. But I think that they were torturing us with LBC. There's an irony there somewhere, isn't there? Joanne, I'm happy that you are in a better place, both physically, geographically and indeed metaphorically. Kerr is in Armadale in Scotland. Kerr, what would you like to say?
OK, let me set the picture for you, James.
Go on.
Imagine you do a 14-hour shift, right?
That's quite hard for me to imagine, Kurt. You appreciate that, I hope. I clock off at lunchtime, but I'll do my best to conjure it up in my mind.
Right, okay, see if you can conjure this up, right? So you get in about 11ish, right? You lie down, you're like, right, I'm about to go to sleep, and then all you hear is do, like your neighbours are having a discotheque.
Yes.
Right? Just imagine that, right?
Bass, isn't
and it doesn't go on until about 1 in the morning. It doesn't go on until about 2. It goes on until about 5 or 6 in the morning. Right? And then, because they're so whacked out their gourd, the dog starts barking. And it barks for about 2 hours. And then you're like, well, I can't have my sleep. 8 o'clock, got to go back to work.
That's it. It's over.
Imagine that one, James.
I am imagining that, and I'm feeling your pain. Are they next door, upstairs, downstairs? What's...
No, next door.
And it's a terrace. It's a connected house.
Well, yeah, basically, yeah.
Semi-detached. And have you ever spoken to them?
No, not semi-detached. It's like flats.
But so the wall, it's coming through your wall, is the point.
Yeah, basically.
Have you ever tried to talk to them?
No, they're quite big gits, if I'm being honest.
So they're intimidating.
And I'm just a skinny wee fella.
So they're physically intimidating people living.
Oh yeah. I mean, we're talking proper skinhead.
A nocturnal life. Is there anything you can do? Do you have? Because this is the point that the Victims Commissioner is making. She's talking about you, really, Kerr. Is that there's no one you can turn to, and even if you did call...
no, because I went to my counsellor, right, and they're normally quite good, right, but they said, well, all we can really do is send a letter. It's
bizarre, isn't it? I wonder what else they could do. I mean,
honestly.
They're coming at it from your perspective, as in you should get more help. But perhaps counselling, I think the last caller really proved that counselling would be very welcome in some of these cases. But in terms of making the problem stop, it's hard to know what could actually work.
Well, exactly.
You get evicted. Exactly. Only eviction would work, really, ultimately, because people are not going to...
but considering... Cause I just want to say, I wouldn't necessarily agree with that, because although it is annoying, we've got to remember, this is bare basic council accommodation. You evict them and they'll have nowhere else to go.
You're a nice man.
So, I mean...
You're a nice man.
So it is a tricky one.
What sort of toll is it taking on you? Is it every night?
Well, mainly every night. Well, here's the thing. Like I say, I'm a support worker. I do 14-hour shifts.
Yeah.
Right? I've caught myself falling asleep at work.
That's not good.
And if I get caught, that's it, done.
Really?
Yeah.
Oh, man. I don't know what to say. Just take care of yourself, Kerr. Seriously.
Cheers, mate.
And it is that bass. It's that thumping bass, because you can't... Even earplugs don't work, do they? And putting your own music on.
You can feel it. It's like a vibration.
I shouldn't do that. I might do it. Right, well, there it is. I mean, that sense there, that torture, as it were, with the then the unpredictability of it, and then you relax. So it's only ever most people listening to this have had an experience of it that was just for one night, like on holiday or something like that, and then you relax and you say, "Oh, it stopped," and then it starts again. And, oh, man alive, Kerr, I do feel for you, I really do. 27 after 11 is the time. Molly's in Westminster. Molly, what would you like to say?
Oh, hi, yeah. It's a real ongoing, but it should end at some point.
Go on.
The landlord next door was defrauded on his rental, and somebody's taken it over, and every 2 weeks there's a new group of sex workers that move in. It's a muse. It's really quiet. I've had to negotiate with various pimps for no heels, no stripper heels. I mean, it's been an absolute nightmare.
So they're in the same building as you, are they?
Next door. I'm in a muse house.
Oh, okay.
So literally the house next door.
So what's the problem with the heels then? Just the noise?
It's like, I thought it was DIY initially, and knocked on the door, and the guy that was looking after them just said, "Oh, it's all right, love. You just get them to take their heels off." And since then, every 2 weeks, 3 weeks, groups change. I get men knocking on my door at night. Christmas, there was a queue, 6 men waiting to go in.
Good Lord.
Recently, the webcam work has got loud, so I hear that as well. It is, I can only say it's a kind of low-level stress. It's not sort of moments of anger at all. It's just a low-level stress that you've got nowhere to go. Yeah. Nowhere to go. Initially,
that's the point. That's the point, because you go home to escape from low-level stress, and yet it's there. It was
funny initially. It was funny. I mean, you could imagine.
You've got a brothel next door. Yes, I can see why that was funny originally.
And also, I'm torn between worrying about trafficked girls.
Yeah,
I called the Union of Prostitutes just to check that I should be worried. Police don't even make welfare calls on them. There was one there was really a lot of noise one night, and I worried.
Yeah.
But the worst of it is that literally I can't use one side of my house. It's, and the night, and it's night activity, and we work in the day.
Right.
And it's just ongoing. It's a foreign landlord who invested, has no investment in the community at all, doesn't really care.
Sure.
I mean, obviously he's getting ripped off because they're not paying rent. I know that.
So who can you turn to? What did the police say? No one at all.
No one. Police. Brothels are legal.
Right.
So, but in terms of the criminal, I mean, what case can I bring? I mean, I'm not the defrauded party.
I know. So there's nothing. So how does it end then? Are you just hoping that
it ends with eviction at some point? It's an online platform. I'm not going to say which one.
No, please don't.
I don't think they're very. No, they're not. They're not very secure. I would say, they're really not as rigorous as, say, a local estate agent would be. I mean, and it can happen to anyone, by the way, but
clearly
they're not as rigorous. And it's just, I have to say, there were moments where I just kind of sob.
No, I can believe it, because it's the unrelenting nature of it. That's what I was keen to communicate. I'm just sorry that so many people are in such a position to do so. It's like light at the end of the tunnel territory. There isn't one, or if there is, you don't know what it looks like. The business model involves them moving on at some point, but when, I don't know. And that's why Joanne, the first caller, comes back round again, when she actually moved house. Molly, sounds as if you're a long, long, long way away from that. But imagine the injustice of that, being essentially hounded out of a home that you love because of other people's inability to behave themselves. And I want to bring that element of the conversation up as well. What is it? Am I sounding like, that Thucydides in about 1500 BC wrote about how the younger generation were awful? So there is nothing new about people saying, aren't the younger generation, things are much worse than they were in my day. So am I turning into that? Or is there a sense that the awareness of people around you has diminished in recent years? I mean, the example I gave you was people using their technology on buses, but of course the technology didn't exist when we were younger. So maybe if it had done, it would have. I don't know. Is there a change in society brought about by an increasing, I'm going to use a great word, probably incorrectly, atomization, a sort of increasing atomization of the population? I'm now going to look that word up while Thomas Watts brings you the headlines. It is 11:36. This notion of antisocial, it's a very, very big deal, but and I didn't realise Keir Starmer was talking about it today. I don't know whether there's a link between the two, but you just heard Thomas mention it in his news bulletin. I mean, how does the politics of it work? It is another example of Starmer essentially demonstrating a genuine desire to help people who are going through things that government or the state or authority should be helping with. I think Kerr, the caller from Scotland, who just described that sense of complete impotence, possibly articulated it best, although Joanna, having to move house, described it in the most arresting of terms. Well, what could a politician actually do? Well, if a former DPP can't help, then I wonder who can. So we'll take some more calls on that, but I do want to give you a quick update. Thanks to a chap on Twitter, actually, called Edwin Hayward, the author of Slaying Brexit Unicorns. I've got a rather tidy little digest of everything that's happened in 24 hours regarding Brexit. And I tell you, it beggars belief, frankly, unless you listen to this show, in which case you'll barely be surprised. 11:37 is the time. Back to the antisocial behaviour. Paul's in Leeds. Paul, what made you pick up the phone?
Hi, James. I love to speak to you.
Likewise.
We had basically, me and the missus, we lived in a 7th floor flat quite a number of years ago, and the guy above us, used to live above us, unfortunately died, and the flat was empty for probably a good couple of months. We started seeing a guy wandering in and out of the lift, sort of chinking sides all the time, and you'd see him of a morning, you'd see him of a night, and he was obviously going up to that flat.
Right.
And he was basically moving in. And so we started doing a lot of shuffling around during the evening because we were both at work during the day. And sort of just, let them get on with it because they're decorating and all that. So over the weeks, we started hearing, one night about 11 o'clock, we just started hearing this dun, dun, like Long John Silver walking across the floor. That's what it sounded like, you know.
Right. So you mean with someone with a wooden leg, is what you're saying?
Yeah, basically, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. So we've been hearing this for like a few days, and it was starting to get a bit annoying.
Do you know, the problem I've got here is partly because of your accent and partly because of the way you're telling the story. It sounds like you're setting up a punchline, Paul.
No, there's no punchline.
I know there isn't.
End up having to move out. You know.
Go on.
I am a Scouser originally, but I've lived in Leeds for probably half my life. So anyway.
So there's a fella upstairs, sounds like he's got a wooden leg.
Yeah. So, but he hasn't, because we've seen him in the lift.
Yes. So
I thought after a week of this, I thought, right, I'll go and approach him. So I did. I went upstairs, apparently knocked on his door. He'd got out, scraggy-headed bloke. He was half drunk, you know what I mean? And I said, listen, mate, do us a favour. I said, the noise you're making, it's like 11 o'clock at night. Do you mind just, turning in a little bit and do it during the day? We're both at work. You're obviously not at work, so I could just tell in the way he walked. He said, it's not me, mate. I said, well, who is it? He said, I think I've got a ghost.
There is a punchline. You cheat.
So I said to him, who's the ghost of a pirate? Because all we can hear is someone clock, clock, clock over the you know, in the living room of a night.
Yeah.
So he just claimed all the time. He said, it's not me, it's a ghost. I found my paint brushes everywhere. I found me paint pots in the fridge and all kind of stuff. He was coming up with some, like, garbage. I'll look if there's anywhere I can use. So anyway...
how long did it go on for?
It went on for about 2 or 3 weeks. So
we're not quite in the realms of psychological torture here, are we, Paul?
It went on for 3 weeks before I got into the council. It went on for a lot longer than that because he refused to talk to us in the end. He wouldn't open his door. He was putting rotten fish through our letterbox.
Really?
Well, he went off his head.
He just took against you. How did you get rid of him?
Well, we ended up in mediation in the end because we found out it was his wife who had moved in. She did actually have a prosthetic leg, but she was wearing, like, clogs. It was like basically walking across a walk.
Why would he not tell you that his wife lived? Was he hidden his wife, had he, or something?
I don't know. I don't know whether he was planning on locking it in a cupboard, and I don't know.
Right. So there was someone there with a prosthetic leg. It wasn't your imagination. Yeah. It certainly wasn't a ghost.
Yeah, and he put floor down, wooden floor.
Yeah.
Which you don't put down on any floor flat when you've got someone directly below you.
You wouldn't have thought. So what happened in mediation then?
So we had mediation with the couple and me and Mrs. Emma. And, we spoke about maybe them getting them changed to carpets. We'd even help along with it if it made our life a bit easier.
Yeah.
And they both got up and walked out and said, basically, sod yous, we're staying here, off you go. And we ended up leaving in the end because we just couldn't. It went on for months and months every night. And I mean, it ended up being psychological. So I felt like people were walking through my head every night. It was like.
And how did it end?
Nightmare. Well, we moved out in the end.
Oh, blimey, sorry. So sorry, I thought this was a less serious story than some of the others. So it reached a point where you just thought, I can't put up with this anymore.
Yeah, because they were not willing to listen, and then, like I said, they were putting people...
Well, they didn't. I tell you what, Paul, they didn't have a leg to stand on.
That was going to be my punchline.
It's not funny. I mean, and obviously no offence intended to anybody who is, all of that. But it's hard to express, isn't it? You just reach that breaking point. You reach that point where you go, no, can't do it, not having it.
Yeah,
and off you go. It's easier as a tenant, probably. It's easier to move than it is as a homeowner.
Yeah, I mean, it did help us. In the end, it probably did worked in our favour because we ended up getting out and getting a house instead of it was Leeds City Council at the time, and they managed to move that a lot quicker because we sort of got pushed up the lid because we both sort of said, we're not just suffering mental abuse, it's everything around it. We're struggling with work because we're getting crept up at 2 o'clock, 3 o'clock in the morning and
I
knocks on the door and the rest of it. So
I do. No, it's I mean, I agree that counselling would be helpful for people like you and all our callers today. But what the actual... I'd probably have a look at what Starmer's said in this speech, shouldn't we, and see whether or not he's laid out any actual plans to deal with the issue, as it were, as opposed to the aftermath, as opposed to the consequences. This one caught my eye, oddly. I mean, what a desperately unlucky system of events this is, where we go... thought we'd cracked it, James. We had 2 young boys who were never told off because their parents worked such long hours and they wanted their kids to like them. So they would scream and scream and scream from 6:30 in the morning until bedtime. They moved out and we thought our lives would get better. The new couple moved in and they've got a dog. When they're in, you don't hear a peep. But the minute they leave, the dog starts howling and barking for all day long, up to 5 hours at a time. Sometimes, this is the line that caught my eye, sometimes the quiet is almost worse than the barking itself because you are always anticipating it in the quiet times. That's what I was trying to convey earlier, that sense of never actually being able to relax because you're just waiting for it to start again. And the minute you let yourself relax, it probably will start again. It's a killer, isn't it? Kate's in Barnet. Kate, what can you tell us?
Yeah, thanks for taking my call, James. Ours happened about 10 years ago. We had a dream home, which I purchased when I had my second child, and spent a sort of a 12 months lovingly doing up, renovated, did some restructuring on it, and then moved in. And we had a wonderful time for about a year, just under a year. And then we had an unusual situation in that the person living next door to us, on one side was an elderly couple, an elderly family with a woman, a very old woman, and she had 3 children who used to come and go and look after her. She passed away. And then the neighbour on the other side of us bought the home.
Right.
So I hope you can follow that. So it was a terrace property. Yeah. And then one neighbour was the one who purchased the other side, and then he illegally turned it into a HMO, so a house of multiple occupancy. And then filled it with about 10 to 12 very young people who were a mixture of drug dealers, students, employed people as well, but all very young. And,
so noise.
Noise, music, relations, shall we say, put it mildly. And my children were 2 and 6 at the time, so we used to play a game. Yeah, we used to play a game with them where we sort of, tell them, right, okay, let's put a bit of a music on or a CD on in your room as you're going to bed, because no one could sleep. It got violent in the end. We used to go next door and speak to the landlord and say, look, they're making a lot of noise. There's lots of people in there. You don't know what it's like. And we tried our best to be as polite about it as possible, but it got violent in the end. He picked up a metal grate at one point to attack my husband.
Oh, dear.
And the police had to be called. So, yeah, we had many visits from the police.
Could they do anything?
Yes, they spoke to them, to be fair. They spoke to them. They went next door and talked to them, but then they retaliated by calling the police on us.
Oh, Lord.
I know. It was so bizarre. And they came and said, well, they've complained about you. They sent about 2 squad cars to talk to a family with a 2-year-old and a 6-year-old, which was very strange, but it was a complete retaliation, very, very. So
that's it. Your peace of mind's gone. It's been stolen from you.
And the person, the tweet or the text that you just read out was very true. So when it was quiet, you didn't really get a chance to enjoy it because you were always waiting for the noise to start. There was one point where he decided to kick a football against the wall or a tennis ball. I'm not quite sure which one it was, and he'd do it continuously.
Yes.
Like, da-dum, 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 for,
drive you potty.
About an hour.
So you moved?
I don't know. Yeah, we 2 years, we put up with it.
And then just thought, we can't take it anymore.
Can't take it anymore. So we lost, luckily for me, I had the means to keep it on as a rental property, so it's now a rental property.
Right.
And we moved, and found comfort in Barnet, and we're surrounded by elderly people. Barnet's a very aged area.
I don't want to upset the good burgers of Barnet. I'm sure it's but I hear you. You're just not. Your nightmare would be to see a bunch of people in their early 20s moving in next door, and loads of young people, perfectly wonderful neighbours, but not the ones that you ended up living next door to. Thank you, Kate. James in Hounslow points out that sometimes people who are hard of hearing will be using their loudspeakers on phones, and I absolutely don't want to add to your burdens, James. So we must recognise that for some people that is the only mode of communication that works, whether you're on public transport or not. But I certainly wasn't including you in my critique of people who are watching the football highlights on the bus with the volume on full and no headphones on. 11:47 is the time, and you are listening to James O'Brien on LBC. 11:51 is the time. I think might mix things up a little bit here. Can we activate the sting, please, Keith?
Sneak here, sneak here, sneak here.
So I don't know if you remember Esther McVeigh. If you'd forgotten about her, I can only apologise for bringing her back into your consciousness. So she's written an article for the Daily Mail today, which accompanies a headline that says, Minister for Common Sense, Labour wokery would divide Britain. And McVeigh's piece has the headline, So does Starmer want a society of feuding factions? And what I love about this smear Keir story is the absolute pant-wetting stupidity of it. So Keir Starmer gave a speech, was it last week or early this week, when he finally got around to addressing the ludicrous attempts to turn everything into a culture war by the Tories, focusing particularly on the National Trust and the Royal National Lifeboat Institute. And he essentially said, just give over and stop it, will you? It's pathetic, which is obviously true. So Esther McVeigh has somehow managed to write an article which accuses him of waging culture wars. A man who's only really said one thing on the subject, which was stop being so silly. And her proof that he is waging a culture war is this. This is a man who solemnly took the knee in support of the Black Lives Matter organisation in 2020. Esther McVeigh calls it divisive, which is actually true. It divides racists from non-racists. So I give her that. It is quite divisive because racists hate it and anti-racists do it. So that proves that he's a culture warrior somehow, which makes the entire Premier League and every footballer in the world a culture warrior, give or take one or two, of course. And he also apparently finds it notoriously difficult to define what a woman is. But why do people keep asking him? Answer, well, actually, whether Esther McVeigh is bright enough to understand this or not, I do not know. But 30p Lee has provided a very helpful explanation of what's actually going on here.
The big thing in 2019, there was three things that won us the election. It was nothing to do with me. It was Brexit, it was Boris, it was Corbyn. And it was as simple as that. Those three things together was a great campaign. Great ingredients. At the next election, we haven't got those three things. So we're going to have to think of something else. It'll probably be a mixture of culture wars and trans debate.
So there is the recently resigned deputy chairman of the Conservative Party who really wants his job back and really regrets not voting for the bill that he resigned in order to vote against, but didn't vote against because when he went into the lobby, some nasty people started sniggling at him. He is literally, and he got made deputy chairman after that, so he has literally laid out the desperation that the Tory party has to turn everything into culture war, to fight an entire election on culture wars. Keir Starmer turns around and says, stop being so silly. And Esther McVeigh writes an article for the Daily Mail about how Keir Starmer is obsessed with waging culture wars. Look, smear Keir is up and running now. But I mean, are we going to get a better one than that? Here it is. Starmer's real problem is that not only is he a card-carrying culture warrior, so it's a bit like, I don't know if you've ever, I'm trying to think of an analogy here, where one person is screaming furiously at the other person, and the other person is just sort of looking at them a bit like this, a bit sort of, all right, Karen, what's that? What? So you've got that. So, we're having a really big fight, aren't we, you? And you just sort of go, you're a bit weird, aren't you? Calm down. What are you getting so worked up about? Look at you big old culture warrior. So there you go. And she is apparently now known as the Minister for Common Sense. And what do you think that is, if not a desperate attempt to inject culture war nonsense into just about every corner of political discourse? So that is this week's probably, and there's only an hour left together, so there may be a late contender. That's probably the best example this week of... Oh, we got a short one. When did that come from? Did you do that? Well done, Keith. That's nice. See what happens if we all pull together. Team OB. It's finally come. It's fine. Yay! Peter's in Stoke-on-Trent. Last word on the antisocial behaviour. You wouldn't want to live next door to Esther McVeigh, would you, Peter, come to think of it? But we digress. What prompted you to pick up the phone?
So ASB. So I live in a quiet cul-de-sac. I've been here for about 18 years. So we're in a kind of a semi-rural area. So you think it's really quiet and so on. But
that's your dog. Oh, this has already gone a bit awkward. That's your dog, right?
Yes, it is.
And now you're about to complain about...
There's actually two police cars outside, and I'll come on to that in a minute. Crikey. But anyway...
This is all very live. Carry on.
It's very live, absolutely. So long story short,
yes.
We have somebody, a resident in our community that is or a family, shall we say, that are involved in, shall we say, drug dealing. Okay?
Right.
And the simple fact is that it's all the stuff that comes with that. So we have taxis at all hours, people coming up on bikes, people could be beeping their horns in their own cars and things, people wandering around in the street. They've obviously been taking stuff. And as we live in the cul-de-sac, and as you're sort of walking up and down, you see these people quite regularly, and it's quite disturbing because some of them are off their faces.
No, it's horrible. It's horrible.
It's really quite scary. So,
yes. When did they move in? When did they move in?
Well, they moved in actually about 2008. They've actually been here a long time. But the interesting thing about it was it only became apparent to the majority of the community just after lockdown.
Okay, what was going on?
And essentially what happened is that the family concerned had property bought for them by their parents. The parents ran a successful local building company. Right. The individual concerned was a director of that company, but he got himself into drugs. His father eventually sacked him, and his only way of making money is essentially getting involved with drugs. And
so the situation has escalated over the years. Why are the police there now?
Because they said regular patrols to try and deal with it. And that's the next point I'm going to come on to, because once I became aware of it 2 years ago, I thought, I'm not accepting this. We live in a quiet community. These things shouldn't be happening, and I want to do something about it. So I started by writing to the local MP, the local councillors, and eventually got in touch with the police. And ultimately, we have some level of dialogue with the local chief inspector, the local commander for our borough. And to be fair to him, he's been very, very good and stuff. But the fundamental problem is it's very, very difficult for the police to actually do anything about it.
Yeah,
because
that's the point, isn't it?
Yeah, this is the problem, is that, you take this individual to court for misdemeanours, they just fine him, let him off, and he comes back and carries on doing what he's doing. We've even had situations with some partial closures on the property as well, which is basically restricting the people that actually go there, the people that live there, and so on. But here's the worst part about it: they have children that live in that property.
Right.
So you've got all these activities going on. There's sometimes fighting. There's all these bad people turning up and so on. But it's ultimately disrupting the community, and what should be a nice, peaceful area is problematic, and that's the sad part.
How much damage has it done to your peace of mind? It's not quite the same as having a sort of thumping baseline or a wooden leg coming through the floors or the walls.
Yes, I was listening to the previous callers about that. But what you have is that as soon as you go into the street, you don't know what you're going to see. Okay, because you have people could be wandering up the street in a car. We've had situations where cars are coming very, very quickly and got into the property. Right. You have people who are off their faces walking around. You don't know if they've got weapons on them and things. So you're always thinking about what could happen. And that's the fundamental issue here, is that you're worried about what could happen to you. And there's a lot of mixture in the street in terms of demographic. We've got pensioners, we've got children, we've got young women and so on. Everybody's quite frightened about it, but it's a difficult problem to deal with and to fix.
I hear you. It's interesting, isn't it? Starmer has actually twice in a day. I've referred to the Daily Express. I don't think it's an extraordinary. He's written an article for them saying that, as Director of Public Prosecutions, I saw how antisocial behaviour can ruin lives. As Prime Minister, I will take tough action on yobs terrorising our streets. So time will tell. But you highlight two things. The difficulty of dealing with it. If the person responsible is just determined not to make any effort or any change at all, the system runs out of road, doesn't it? But the second bit is you're describing hypervigilance, I think. You're describing a psychological condition called hypervigilance when you're almost in a fight or flight mode all the time, not just in moments of emergency, because as you described it, it was as if the next emergency could be any minute now.
Well, we've probably got the most security cameras in these streets in our borough, something like that. And we all talk. We've got a WhatsApp community, so we're talking to each other all the time. We're trying to provide evidence to the police constantly, but it's so difficult to actually get something resolved. And the other problem, of course, is the fact these people own the property. Makes it
so there's no landlord you can call on. Well, I feel for you, Peter, I really do. It's no consolation to you at all, but you've really helped convey the urgency of the situation, the seriousness of the situation. Thank you. The time now is 12 noon. 4 minutes after 12 is the time. Permanent justices are currently walking into the Supreme Court, into the International Court at The Hague, and poised to give their ruling on calls for Israel to stop the Gaza conflict after South Africa has brought a case accusing them of genocide. We will keep an eye on that for you, and because we don't know what the logistics of it will be, how long the ruling will take to read out. It might be really quick, might be pages, but we'll be keeping an eye on it and covering it in depth throughout the day, no doubt, on LBC. I've been ticked off a couple of times. I did just use the word Karen as a pejorative, and some quite compelling explanations of why I shouldn't have done. Susan says, I wish you wouldn't do that, as I don't think there's an equivalent for men, and so us girls really do have quite enough slurs directed just for us. as it is. And Ellie says, I disagree with Esther McVeigh as much as you do, but why call her a Karen? Are you unaware of the misogynistic undertones of that insult? I think I probably was, Ellie, actually. But I'm not now, because Susan has pointed out that it's an insult where there's no equivalent for men, which does make it sexist or misogynistic. So consider me educated. I won't do that again. There's probably a reason why I've never done it before, actually. But it does have that air to it, doesn't it, of an insult specifically directed at women. So my apologies. It is 5 minutes after 12. I don't know how long you've listened to this show. I can't, no, can I? But if I told you that I used to be very like Ian Duncan Smith on a single specific subject, what subject do you think it would be? I'm sticking with that. That's how I'm describing. I just felt a bit ashamed then, as I said it. What subject, out of all the subjects under the sun that might come up relatively regularly on a radio phone-in programme, which one has found me historically closest to Ian Duncan Donuts' position? I might wait to see if I get any texts. Apparently the male equivalent of a Karen is a Kevin, but I don't think we'll go there. I just think we'll just excise that from our lengthy list of insults that we like to be equal opportunity, so anyone can be a wazzock. It's not gender or sex specific. What subject? If I said now, there is one subject that we've done together over the years where I did on occasion find myself sounding worryingly like Ian Duncan Donuts, and the answer is marriage. It's an enduringly fascinating subject for me, and for the first time ever, fewer than half of adults in this country are now married or in a civil partnership, official figures show. It's the first time they've counted since 2020, but it just dipped below. In 2021, 50%, 49.7% of those aged over 16 were in a legal relationship. And by 2022, it had fallen still further. It just dipped another 0.3 of a percentage point to 49.4. The proportion of people in England and Wales living together in couples has remained about the same. So it just means that fewer and fewer people are bothering to formalise their partnership. Decline in marriage and civil partnerships, even as same-sex weddings have become a thing since 2013. So you'd have thought the numbers might actually have gone up a bit as same-sex couples played catch-up, if you like. Joe says corporal punishment. That was a long time ago. I shouldn't have asked this question now. You're clogging up my inbox with your mischief again. I don't know what Ian Duncan Donuts' views on tattoos are, George, but yes, mine used to be a little bit embarrassing. No, it's not speeding fines, and it's certainly not the death penalty, John, but it could have been corporal punishment, Joe, although I have changed my mind. I've written a whole book about all the things I've changed my mind on, so I'm taking my... there you go. Joe's got there in the end. Marriage is not like corporal punishment at all. You're damn right, Joe. So I think I know why I have had such a Victorian or prim. What's the word? What's the word like prim? What's that word that I'm looking for? So like not pompous, not prim. Like a word to describe a sort of. My attitude to marriage was sort of a combination of old-fashioned and judgmental. I would look down on you if you weren't married. What's the word? I'm a po-faced? I can't remember. It'll come to me when you've texted it, as you will no doubt do in a moment, to 84850. So I'm mentioning this because not everybody's been listening to the programme for as long as you have. I very much used to tell people, and I meant it. It was tongue-in-cheek because it was provocative, but it was sincere. I used to tell people that if they weren't married, if they weren't in a formal partnership, either a civil partnership or a marriage, then their relationship was inferior to mine, which is nearly used quite a rude word then, much ruder than the one I used earlier. It's quite a, I can't say the word I want to say now. It's quite a silly thing to do, that. It's quite an obnoxious way to behave. Say, oh, well, you're not married, your relationship is inferior to mine. But I never lie to you. And it is how I feel. I do have a sense of confusion at why, if you've met the person you want to spend the rest of your life with, you wouldn't seek to formalise it. But I also, thanks to you actually, I now have prissy, possibly was the word, or pious. Yeah, you're so much better at this than I am. Why don't we swap jobs for the day? You do the show, and I'll send a helpful text to 84850. Prissy, I think, was the word I was looking for, but pious is arguably even better. I'm not going to combine prissy and pious because I think that would be on the Ofcom banned list, but I quite like the combination of prissy and pious. But I do genuinely believe it. So what you've given me over the years is cognitive dissonance. You've dressed me down for this. You've pointed out that my position is quite snobbish, perhaps, or unnecessarily obnoxious. But I can't change that. It hasn't changed the way I feel. So on other issues like tattoos and corporal punishment, I've gone full 180. I'm now I'm possessed of completely the opposite position to the one that I had when I started this job. But I still have, even though all the things that you've told me over the years that should really have talked me down from this pious position on marriage and civil partnerships, I've still got it. And I think I know why. I think it is partly because of my wife. I think that I love my wife so much that the relationship has to have some sort of stamp on it that no other relationship ever had. It just feels to me like an announcement to the world. And that might be an insecurity on my part. But it feels to me as if you've really met the person that you want to spend the rest of your life with, you want to formalise it. And if you don't want to formalise it, then you haven't met the person that you want to spend the rest of your life with. Priggish. Yes, priggish, prissy, pious. These are all great words, aren't they? I should have been able to come up with at least one of them. So I'm just being completely honest with you because I think my opinion is quite offensive to people who aren't neither married nor in a civil partnership. But I think it's really sad news that I'm now in a minority. I think it's really sad news that fewer than half of adults have made that public commitment, have made that public betrothal. Why haven't you? 0345 60973. If you've met the person that you want to spend the rest of your life with, if you want to have a family with, if that's how you're minded, why on earth wouldn't you make a full and public commitment? Hit the numbers now, you will get through. 0345 6060973. And I do like doing this occasionally. I can't do it too often because it becomes a little bit sort of hair shirt and self-flagellation-y. What's wrong with me? What's actually wrong with me? How can I sit here and genuinely hold my relationship as somehow being superior to yours because of a piece of paper or a church service? I can see that it's not. I really can. This is what I mean by cognitive dissonance. I know that it's not. Somewhere inside, I really know that it's not. But I think that it is. I know that it's not, but I think that it is. I sound like it just doesn't make sense to me. Are you like me? Have you got it as well? Or are you better at it than me and you can actually explain why you think you're right to consider the relationship inferior? A hierarchy of relationship value is what I'm describing. A genuine hierarchy of relationship values. And on this one, I am simultaneously embarrassed by and committed to my belief. Why would you not want to have a marriage or a civil partnership? And if you fancy it, what's wrong with me? What's wrong with this position that I hold? Why am I convinced in my bones of something that in my brain I know to be unfair and even perhaps unkind? I'd add a couple of things. I have had messages over the years, including from a pal of mine, from people who have previously expressed quite profound unhappiness with my priggish, prissy, pious position. And then subsequently, for reasons, they've got married. And they said, oh, do you know what? You were right. I'm playing this card, and I'm playing it shamelessly. They've got back in touch with me. You know who you are. And they said, you know, I used to think you were a right pompous prig on that marriage issue, but we've actually done it now. And because the kids really wanted us to. And you're right, it is different. It does feel different. So what's going on? 0345 6060 973 is the number that you need. I don't have contempt for people who aren't married. Don't be mean, whoever sent that text in. I categorically don't. But I possibly what I do have is worse than contempt. I've got pity. No one wants to be pitied. No one wants my pity. But I just genuinely feel that denying yourself this bond, this formal bond, is pitiable. Hit the numbers now, you will get through. James, get over yourself, says Tricia. Equal rights financially is a good thing, a good reason to formalise things. Otherwise, meh, I'd feel sorry for you, Tricia. I don't know why, but I do. I know you don't want me to, and I know you don't think that I should, but there we are. So there's two topics here. One quite traditional in the annals of radio phone-ins. How important is marriage? Why on earth are you not in one, even though you're in a committed lifelong relationship? 03456060973. But then the second one, which is not really traditional in the annals of radio phone. What's actually wrong with me? Thank you, Scott. I did used to use the phrase gold standard as well. He says, it texts from a pal of mine, you used to say families were not gold standard if mum and dad weren't married. Well, that was the Catholic upbringing, and I'm open-minded enough to have rejected that and to also recognise how obnoxious it was. Remember that my biological parents weren't married when I was born, so not only was I being obnoxious, I was being quite hypocritical as well. But I'm fascinated by it, and you should be as well, just on a social level, this relationship between marriage and society, and why I think it's bad news that fewer than half of adults are married or civil partners, but I simultaneously know that it shouldn't matter. Kate says, perhaps it's Catholic guilt, James, authorised sex versus unauthorised sex. I got over that bit of Catholicism quite early, Kate, without going into too much details. It didn't once I was sort of 17, 18 years old, it ceased to be much of an issue for me, that sort of guilt. But speaking of Catholicism, this one really caught my eye. Mick and Mark, that sounds like we planned it. I'll be with you imminently, I promise. My friend has refused my marriage invitation for April, James, as it is a civil ceremony and he is a pious Catholic. I do think he's a bleep for doing this. That's a great word, by the way. I wish I could use it on the radio. As someone from a Catholic background yourself, James, do you think that this is okay? Because I can see a similarity here in attempting to value or put a hierarchy on other people's relationships. No. So I acknowledge that I was an arse, right? But I wasn't as big an arse as him. And I won't use that word again either now. It's just illustrative. Nowhere near as big a bleep as him, because that's incredibly obvious. I'm not coming to your wedding as your friend because I disapprove of the mode of ceremony that you're having. But it goes to show how multifaceted this conversation can be. And do not let me go home without doing the Brexit roundup, OK? It's a really good one. Mick's in Whittington in Shropshire. Mick, what would you like to say?
Hello, James.
Hello.
I've got quite a unique perspective on this. I think
I'll be the judge of that.
A lot of different things.
Go on.
Okay, so I was brought up in care, and luckily I was placed with the foster family, and that was a Church of England vicar and his wife. Okay. Quite lucky, really. I think I'm right in saying my dad was the first vicar in the UK to be ordained on the strength of a psychology degree rather than theology, so he had a bit of a different kind of take on religion, and he certainly didn't believe in forcing it down anybody's throat and that sort of stuff. My mum has got quite sort of strong Christian beliefs. My dad still has, but my mum believes in marriage and all this, that and the other. So for many years I thought that was going to be the journey for me, and that was the path in life, to find somebody, settle down, get married, have children, and all that sort of stuff. And I've been with my current girlfriend. I've been with my girlfriend Sally.
There you go. You see what you just did, though. You're proving that's it. That's like, mate. That's Freudian. That's in your mind, somewhere in your head. Poor Sally. I hope she's not listening. Somewhere in your head, she's your current girlfriend. I don't say my current wife.
No, I just think somewhere in Sally's head, she'd probably think you'd be damn lucky to find somebody else that'll take you on.
Yeah, fair enough.
We've been together for 15 years, and you know what? In the beginning, I think we both sort of felt like that's the path we were going to go down, and then we just sort of came to the realisation that we don't need a piece of paper to prove how we feel. Yeah. And actually, we've seen ourselves stand the test of time.
No, I know you're right, but I don't feel
when a lot of other
people
haven't.
There's something wrong with my bones, Mick. Seriously, I know you're right. But this is how I feel. That's what conditioning is, isn't it? That's what.
Yeah, 100%. Yeah, and I guess that's where we were at the time, but we gave ourselves the freedom to just say, do you know what? Let's just not bother and and the children are happy.
Yeah, of course.
And we're happy. And like I said, we've seen other people that have got married in that space of time that have got married and split up, and it's all been nasty and horrible.
Are your parents comfortable with it? Are they still with us?
Listen, my dad's very, very sort of easygoing.
Yeah.
And he knows that kids are going to do whatever they're going to do. Mum, I think she would, because of not necessarily being the most ordered person in life, but I think she probably sees that as the final piece of the jigsaw in her head.
Yeah.
But actually, if she took a step back out of all that and looked at it and thought, you know what, actually, yeah, he's got 2 kids there, they're doing great.
She wants you to get married because she thinks that it's like cement. Yeah. I think that's what it is from your mum's point of view. I can't believe I'm speculating on your mum's motivations, but she does. So it's not a hyscinth bouquet thing. It's not because she's worried what the neighbours will think.
Well, you see, that's interesting because being in the position of the vicar's wife, I think there's always going to be
you're right.
a little bit of that.
Yeah,
there's an added pressure socially, and sort of having a vicar's son that she did have, certainly.
No, it's certainly because you could, it doesn't make them look hypocritical, but you could, as a member of the congregation, wonder why the vicar's own boy hasn't got married if it is such a big deal. But I like the sound of him. He sounds like the right kind of cleric. Thank you, Mick. And we're 100% sure that Sally doesn't want to get married, are we?
100%.
Oh, well, you say that, Mick. You say that. See, this is the point at which, back in the day, I would have become, I think, a little bit obnoxious. And also possibly even a bit paternalistic, stroke misogynistic, because I think I came from a place where I believed that women always want to get married and men sort of resist because they want to, quote, keep their options open or something like that. But maybe, I don't know, maybe I was projecting. Helen's in Colchester. Helen, what would you like to say?
Hi, James.
Hello.
So I have been with my partner now for 34 years nearly, and we have never got married.
Right. Why not?
Because it wasn't something that we wanted to do. I have a bit of an issue with the phrase, the person you want to spend the rest of your life with.
Okay.
Because that's quite an odd thing to say. I think given how well I do a bit, because life is quite long, and situations change, people change. Every day I wake up and I know that I want to be with James and not you, don't panic, with my James. and so that is where we stay. But I have a question for you. Can I ask you a question?
Yeah, of course.
Why do you think it is a bad thing that you think your relationship is superior to everyone else's?
Not my relationship, but the formal, so everybody's. So just someone just tuning in. I mean that by dint of being married, because it's unfair on other people. It's judgmental. It's sanctimonious. That's another good word. And it's not true. I mean, there's no way that because I'm married, my relationship is stronger than yours. It just doesn't make sense. But I still believe it in some mad way.
I'm not sure if that's the reason you believe it. I just think you're where you need to be, and because it's so brilliant, then
but it's
how
not.
Can anybody else who's not in the same position be?
Oh, I see what you mean. So
in such a strong way. Essentially, when you say what's wrong with me, I think it's not what's wrong with you, but what you're doing, James, is you're evangelising.
Yes, I am evangelising.
And people of faith who have that faith and evangelise, they're doing it from the absolute best place because they've found the most wonderful thing and they can't.
Oh, okay. So you're being very generous to me. You're being very generous to me, but I'm coming at it from the other end of the telescope and recalling how hurtful my position used to be for people in your position. So obviously you'd never be offended by any nonsense that I came out with on the radio, but a lot of people were.
I'm not offended by it because I know my relationship is the best. So nothing that you can say about it.
So maybe I'm insecure rather than secure. Maybe me banging on about it all the time is I don't think I am insecure, but why would I care about what other people were doing in their relationship? Why would I care? Why do I? Why did I? It's a funny one.
As I say, I honestly think when you've found something that you think is the best, you're going to present that as the best.
So that's a really lovely contribution. Thank you. So you're essentially saying if you're lucky enough to have found something wonderful, if you're a nice person, you'll try to encourage other people to find the lovely thing that you've found.
Yeah. I really do think that.
What a lovely call. Thank you. That's made the entire conversation worthwhile. I mean, it was already worthwhile, but I'd never thought of it like that way round. Makes me feel a lot more comfortable with I might have to come up with some new words now, Helen. I can't. So it's neither priggish nor prissy or pious or any of those things. Instead, it's evangelical. It's an evangelizing zeal. But of course, as with all evangelizing, it's a little bit, I don't know if arrogance too strong a word, but the idea that, if only you had what I've got, you'd be much happier. And obviously that's not true, because Helen is the polar opposite relationship-wise and absolutely happy. It's a funny one, isn't it? How much of it is nurture then? How much of it is drilled into us? I wonder how many people who hold my position do have a kind of somehow religious foundation for it. Sarah writes, I try to live by the policy that we should let others do as others wish. But raising kids is tough, and I think confirming the relationship provides security for all, and that helps. I also think it is something to be promoted and encouraged if children will be involved. I do too, Sarah, but I don't know if either of us would be able to properly and fully articulate it in the sense of telling someone why they should when they haven't and they don't feel any need to. It's coming up to 12:30. You are listening to James O'Brien on LBC. Michelle says, even though I'm Catholic, I don't think marriage is important. It's just a contract for finance and chattels. Perhaps people change when they're married because of how others look at them. Others might think this is not your final relationship, even if you do. And that's why the couple start saying my husband or my wife, which marks them out as different. There's a lot going on, isn't there? It's coming up to 12:30. Amelia Cox is here with your headlines. 33 minutes after 12, that ruling in The Hague on whether or not Israel is committing genocide in Gaza is underway. It's quite dense. We've got a lawyer following it for us, and as soon as there is digestible clarity, is the phrase I'm going for, digestible clarity, then we will hear from him. Before that, we continue our conversation about marriage, but I am currently remembering that I have to give you a Brexit roundup, an extraordinary 24 hours in Brexit land, but one that I fear probably sets the tone for quite a lot of the traffic coming up in the future. But before that, back to marriage and this weird, very personal subject for me, in that I know that it is not fair to think that if you're not married or in a civil partnership, then there's something a bit wrong. I know it's not fair or true, but it's what I feel. So we're looking at the news that adults, now fewer than half of adults are married or in a civil relationship for the first time ever. It might go back up again. Some of it could be linked to lockdown and stuff, but I somehow doubt it. But also, in a very self-indulgent way, I'm inviting you to analyse me and people like me who subscribe to this school of thought, up to and including the silly fella who's not going to his own friend's wedding because it's a civil service rather than a church service. 12:34 is the time. Mark's in Worcester. Mark, what would you like to say?
Hi, James. So I recently binged all three of your books.
Oh, thank you.
Recently been switched off to yourself in terms.
You've read the chapter on this subject, then, haven't you?
Well, absolutely, yeah. So this was very much a subject that was quite close to my heart, and I was interested to find out by listening to you. It just so happens, obviously, very very soon that you've actually talked about it again.
Yeah, that's funny.
Interested to listen kind of where you stand on it now, and it's interesting that so many of the other subjects that you had very strong opinions on, you kind of, you flexed, you've even gone 180, as you say, but this you're still quite strong on.
Well, cognitive dissonance, mate, really. I know it's silly, but I'd be lying if I said I'd had the same conversion that I have on some of those other issues that you've read about in how not to be wrong.
Yeah, fair point. You want want somebody to analyse where you are. How old were you?
Well, no, I'm more interested in what you think. I think. Oh, well, no,
okay.
we can do it either way. So you're in a relationship, but you feel no need at all to formalise it, I presume.
I have very, very passive views on marriage. I think if somebody wants to get married and it makes them feel happy, then, fair play to them. And I certainly...
You might as well just pat me on the head and give me a biscuit at this point, Mark. You crack on, mate, with your marriage, you weirdo.
No, not at all. For certain people, they have very strong views about it.
Yes.
I certainly wouldn't not go to a friend's wedding. because it was, I certainly would not go to a friend's wedding either because it was, no. I would always, if a friend invites me to a wedding, of course I'm going. For me, myself, I've had several long-term relationships. My girlfriend, we've been together almost 7 years now. She's been married before. She's got children by a previous relationship, by her ex-husband. They lasted however long they lasted. They divorced. I've seen so much divorce in people close to me.
Yes.
Sadly, my mum died when I was young. My dad remarried.
Right.
Got divorced, remarried again, got divorced. So and I've got several friends whose whose marriages haven't even lasted anywhere near as long as my girlfriend's relationship. In terms of commitment. We've bought a house together, which is, as you'll appreciate, a big financial commitment.
It's a much bigger commitment than a marriage.
Yeah, well, I mean, and that's kind of thing. That's where I'm. If my girlfriend turned around to me and said she wanted to get married, I'm not saying I wouldn't do it. I'd do it for her. I have no. If it mattered to her, I would do it for her. But
your needle wouldn't move at all. In terms of enthusiasm versus ambivalence, you'd be just straight down the middle.
It's just a piece of paper and a reason to have a party,
Yeah, well, that's not a bad rationale at all. So go on then, do the other bit. Why did you want to know how old I was? What was the question you were going to ask?
So, I mean, I'm 43 now. Me and my girlfriend have been together since I was 36, 37. So, and like I say, she's had kids in a previous relationship. Can't have kids anymore, even if we wanted them. I appreciate when people meet when they're younger.
Maybe. So I was 26 when I met my wife. Got married quite very quickly, actually. 27, I think. 27.
And there's that air
wanted a family.
That air of uniqueness to it. If you haven't had those long-term relationships, if you haven't already got the kids, etc., etc.
What about this from Frank? See how you get on with this. Frank's in Ealing. He says, not being married feels like you're on loan at a football club and they're not prepared to make you a permanent signing. Of course it doesn't, though, does it? Because it's a mutual arrangement. Frank's positing the notion of one partner really wanting it and the other one not. I think, and again, this is what I mean by cognitive dissonance. Your attitude sounds much healthier than mine, but I can't help the attitude that I've got. 12:39 is the time. Right, I'm going to do this. Nikki, I'm sorry. I hopefully we'll be able to squeeze you in, but I do want to do this properly. This is all, and my thanks to Edwin Hayward, who wrote Slaying Brexit Unicorns, for putting this all together. This is all pretty much in the last 24 hours, okay? The UK has given up on negotiations to extend our trade deal with Canada, which leaves us worse off than when we were an EU member. So Kemi Badenoch was kind of hoping to secure some sort of arrangement that would see us have the same deal in place that we had as EU members. I think it had originally been rolled over, and now they're actually, push has come to shove. So you're looking at 245% tariffs on cheese, Stilton, cheddar, other British cheese imports. That'll kick in. That has kicked in already at the start of the month. They're also planning additional tariffs on British car exports that will come in April. It's essentially Canada doing what happens in trade agreements, which is exerting weight. And the heavier country will exert the most weight. Or not country, of course. Crucially, it's a market. So there you go. These negotiations have been underway since 2022, and it was claimed at the time that it would help more than 10,000 small and medium-sized businesses in Britain. But, it's all gone wrong on that one. That's one story. We've got new border checks coming in, which are estimated to cost £200 million a year in terms of food and drink. You'll remember Jacob Rees-Mogg talked about these Brexit checks when he was still being treated, incredibly, when people were still taking him seriously as a politician. Here's a little reminder.
I thought post-Brexit checks were not going to be disruptive.
That's why we're not adopting them. This would have been an act of self-harm if we'd gone ahead with it. It would have increased costs for people.
So they are going ahead with it because they have to. Whether J-Dog understood that or not at the time is immaterial. So that is going ahead, and it is an act of self-harm, and it is estimated to cost about 200 million quid. MPs have been warned that holidaymakers driving to Europe face queues of up to 15 hours or more in Kent when the new rules for Britons travelling to the European come into force later this year. There's even been warnings, and hopefully hopefully this won't come true, of possible shortages of flowers for Valentine's Day as a consequence of these new incoming border checks. They land, as Pete Foster explained to us earlier this week, at the end of this month. French homeowners, or the owners of second homes in France, have been dealt a blow after a state authority quashed their exemption from onerous restrictions on the time they can spend in the country. The Daily Mail, perhaps inevitably, had reported that the precise opposite result was expected to be delivered, but that has essentially meant that British citizens with second homes in France cannot stay there for more than 90 days. That original arrangement, as with Canada, has expired and doesn't look like it will be renewed. I haven't finished yet. Rishi Sunak's pledge to ensure that no future laws can create a border down the Irish Sea has upset some unionists. It's all designed to try and get Stormont back up and running, but it's also infuriated so-called Brexiteers like Ian Duncan Smith and others, even though it is probably the only way in which to get Northern Ireland government back on track. And finally, the EU has revealed plans to increase its bulk medicine procurement, so the bloc moving as one to secure medicines at a time, as we know, of international shortages. And of course, because the EU has much greater buying power than the UK does, this is feared by experts, predicted by experts, to exacerbate the problems in this country. So there you have it. That is just in the last 24 hours. A trade deal with Canada is back on ice, and tariffs on cheese and sundry other British exports have gone through the roof. The thing that Jacob Rees-Mogg described as an act of self-harm is happening at the end of the month and estimated to cost 200 million quid. The MPs have been warned by experts in the field that we could be looking at delays of up to 15 hours or queues of up to 15 hours for holidaymakers trying to make their way out of Britain into continental Europe. Possible shortages of flowers for Valentine's Day. French homeowners, owners of second homes in France, will not be able to extend their visas from 90 to 180 days after France's Constitutional Council Court handed down a decision on which there is no right of appeal. Rishi Sunak has tried to get Stormont back up and running in Northern Ireland, but in so doing has upset the continuingly delusional Brexiters in his own party. And finally, we are going to be a very small player in the global pharmaceuticals medicine procurement market because the EU is developing plans to act more cohesively across the entire bloc. But remember, everybody knew exactly what they were voting for. We have taken back control, and this is what controlling our borders looks like, or something. It is 12 minutes to 1 and you are listening to James O'Brien on LBC. Sam Foles is a barrister who has advised on issues around genocide in the UK and internationally. He has been watching this judgment at the International Court in The Hague very closely, considering a case brought by South Africa alleging that Israel had embarked upon genocidal behaviour. And Sam joins us now. Sam, what can you tell us?
Well, it was a judgment full of twists and turns. The first big headline is the court found that it was plausible to say that Israel is breaching the terms of the Genocide Convention in respect of Palestine. So it is plausible that South Africa says that Israel is committing a genocide or genocidal acts. Gosh. Now, that is not the same as saying Israel has committed genocide, but it's saying it's plausible, it's arguable. That was the first big headline. South Africa would have then expected that it would follow that the court would order a ceasefire, and that's what South Africa asked for, yes. And the court didn't. The court declines to order a ceasefire and instead made six orders for Israel, or one order with 6 provisions,
right?
That essentially order Israel to do everything in its power to prevent the commission of genocidal acts, to ensure that the IDF doesn't commit any prohibited act, to punish people that do, to allow necessary aid and to preserve evidence, and to submit a report about all of this to the court within 1 month. Now, what's surprising about that is, with the exception of the last bit, the providing a report, yes. Israel already has to do all of those things. So it's already bound by the Genocide Convention. It already has a legal duty to not commit genocidal acts, to punish people that do, to restrain its forces. So after coming forward with a very significant criticism of Israel in finding that it's plausible it's breaching the convention, it was then a very restrained, and I think South Africa would argue weak, order that followed it.
And is this a holding position, Sam, or is this the end of the issue?
No, this is very much a holding position, and it'll be a holding position for a long time. This was simply an interim hearing.
Yes.
And the court made it very clear on several occasions that the determination on whether Israel has actually committed acts of genocide is for the merits hearing, and that's not likely to happen probably for a matter of years.
Crikey.
So this is a case that will run on for a long time. The point of this hearing was to say, number one, is it plausible that there may be breaches, i.e., is this worth carrying on with? Is it worth investigating? Is it a real issue?
Right.
And also, do we need to do something to alleviate the immediate danger to Palestinians? And the court answered yes to both of those questions.
Without really, as you've explained it, not really demanding any new actions from Israel in order to ensure that they are doing the thing that the court has told them to do. As you say, they're already required to do all the things that they've been told to do, except submit a report, which sounds, in the great scheme of things, relatively unimportant.
Well, yes, and I think the report will obviously provide another opportunity for the court to review this. But what Israel will say, we're doing all these things. Israel's position is that we are complying with international law, we're complying with the Genocide Convention. So yes, we're perfectly happy to take all measures necessary to comply with the Genocide Convention, because that's what we've been doing all of this time. So it's arguably a case that both sides could claim victory from here.
And probably will, except for one wrinkle that occurs to me, which is that Israel's position probably will be, as you describe, we will continue to take all measures to prevent genocide. But if the court has found that the genocide accusation is plausible, then it would be quite easy to argue, well, you clearly haven't taken enough measures. Because if you really had taken all measures to prevent genocide, the court wouldn't have found the genocide accusation as plausible.
Yes, and I think that's potentially the point that Israel's allies are going to find themselves under pressure on, because this case realistically was always about Israel's allies, arguably more than Israel.
Yes.
The Israeli government has said they described the court, the ICJ today, as a kangaroo court. And so there's been a sort of level of disrespect from the Israeli administration, although they did comply with and engage with the process in full and in good faith. But it's the US, it's the UK, it's Germany. It's all of these states will now be saying, well, there has been this finding that it's plausible Israel are breaching the convention. There has been a finding that there's a real and immediate danger to Palestinians. Politically, this becomes much more difficult to justify domestically for those states.
And on the ground, then, in the short term, there won't be any particular changes in what Israel is doing in Gaza, but the pressure being brought to bear by allies may change the long-term picture.
Yes, I think possibly one thing in the short term is that allies will put significantly more pressure on Israel to allow in necessary aid, and that is one of the points that's in the order. It's almost politically the easiest to do for allies to really focus on that. Difficult to argue that Palestinian civilians shouldn't be entitled to that aid, and that's a way for states in the West to appear to comply with the order and to appear to take note and sort of satisfy political pressure, while at the same time maintaining their diplomatic position of respecting what they call Israel's need to defend itself.
And finally, Sam, could the court have handed down a stronger judgment, or was it only ever going to be plausibility or not?
It could only ever at this time decide on plausibility.
Yes, that's what I thought. I just wanted to clarify.
Never in a position to make
because as you say, that can only be concluded years hence.
Indeed.
Sam Fowles, many thanks indeed. Did I pronounce your surname correctly, Sam? Sorry.
Yes, perfectly.
Good. I'm glad to hear it. I also noticed when I was very professionally doing a little bit of research before you came on the programme that you acted for John Nicholson in his battle with Nadine Dorries over her claim that liking tweets was an act of bullying.
I did, yes. We're very pleased that John was completely cleared in that case, because it was a huge issue for free speech there.
Indeed, it was.
That a shadow minister who criticised a Secretary of State could then be accused of bullying simply for liking tweets that were critical of her.
There we go. Thank you very much indeed. What a small world this is. I should have retained him when she was tweeting vile things about me, actually. It could have paid for my new kitchen. Speaking of interesting people, James Blunt is the guest on Full Disclosure this week, and I think he's wonderful. It's a tricky interview. I'd love to know what you think about it. I don't often care what you think about it. I just want you to enjoy it. But the first 10 minutes, it was like I was pulling teeth. I had to keep reminding myself, he wants to be here. He wants to be. He's just really uncomfortable in that interview context, and then happily sort of settled into it, warmed to the task, and we had a really, really lovely time. He is an absolutely fascinating man. There's another extraordinary moment now, isn't there? Because you decide to record the record in LA, the first record in LA, Back to Bedlam, and you end up living with Carrie Fisher in Los Angeles.
And mind-blowing to be living with her. And at that stage, that's going to really make you believe you can achieve anything.
What did she like about you?
Well, you know what? First of all, she's a very generous human being.
Yes. She adopted people, didn't she, a bit?
Basically, yes. Yeah. Particularly, those, she was a drug addict herself, and she was very open about that, and people with drug addictions she would invite in and care for and look after. With me, when we met, she said, what do you do, and what's your life all about? And I said, I've left the army, got a record deal, moving to Los Angeles. She asked me where I was going to live, and I said, I haven't organised that yet. And she literally said, come and live with me. For the first month, we didn't really speak.
Right.
I was just out in the studio, and I'd come back late at night, and I never really saw her. And then she had an episode. She's a manic depressive, and she had a bipolar, and she had an absolute episode. They were talking about her staff were talking about her in front of her, and it was a bizarre moment to watch and uncomfortable. But suddenly, seeing her have this episode, I could really relate to what was going on in her brain, and suddenly that openness between her and myself, became apparent, and we just found we could talk for hours.
Proper intimacy.
Absolutely. And from completely different backgrounds. Not really. No. I mean, I suppose maybe with, your mate when you're 14 and you have a dream and you're going to, and form a band and you're going to be... But those are such childish ambitions and dreams, and that's why you have those intense friendships as children.
Yes, sure.
But it was amazing to be an adult and have that intensity of conversation with someone as well, so open.
And someone who'd lived so much, when in a sense you'd lived a lot, but you were starting a new life at this point.
Absolutely. And to therefore be so open as to not be afraid to say the things that you shouldn't say to anyone else. The things you're genuinely most embarrassed about. Yeah. The things just the things that you just wouldn't share with anyone. They're your private thoughts. And I write about it in the book, saying, where she knows where every body is buried. She really did. I mean, we were very, very open.
Because you'd seen her naked.
Yeah,
emotionally.
Exactly.
You felt you could bear yourself to her.
The shame and humiliation with which she had to deal with having a sort of breakdown in front of other people and them talking about her. We just felt we could be very open.
She left a huge hole in your life, I think.
Yeah, and as you say, in many others. It's funny bumping into other people who will talk as passionately about her as I do.
Just a really, really interesting man. A fascinating interview. The producers say, crikey, he's posh. And at the beginning of his career, he was offered a record deal on the proviso that he toned his accent down. And he walked out of the room. I like people who are comfortable with their class, probably because I spent almost all of my life until relatively recently not knowing what class I belonged to and desperately trying to fit in everywhere. I like the security of people who are comfortable with their class. I liked everything about him. It's a really good interview. Check it out. If you missed any of today's show, you can listen back on Catch Up on Global Player, the official LBC app, where you can also pause and rewind live radio. Download it now for free from your app store or head to globalplayer.com. Coming up at 4 on LBC, it's Tom Swarbrick. But now it's time for Sheila Fogarty. 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 It's time for Sheila Fogarty.